The storm came without warning. Catherine Morgan gripped the steering wheel of her weathered Jeep Cherokee, knuckles white against the rising howl of wind that seemed to carry voices within it. The road ahead vanished periodically behind curtains of swirling snow, revealing itself in brief, treacherous glimpses that required every ounce of her concentration. Cumberland Pass had a reputation, even in good weather. Tonight, as darkness fell and temperatures plummeted, that reputation seemed well-earned. No one with sense would be driving these winding mountain roads. But Catherine had never claimed to possess an abundance of sense, not when it came to finding answers. 3 years without a word. 3 years since her mother had ventured into these same mountains and vanished without a trace. The authorities had eventually closed the case, citing the unforgiving wilderness and Elizabeth Morgan's history of erratic behavior. The implication being that a middle-aged woman with no survival training had succumbed to the elements or her own poor judgment. They hadn't known Elizabeth like Catherine did. Her mother might have been eccentric, prone to sudden relocations and mysterious absences, but she was never careless. And she had known these mountains, spoken of them with a mixture of reverence and fear that Catherine had never understood. Until now, perhaps. Driving through this otherworldly landscape where the boundaries between earth and sky blurred into something primordial, Catherine felt a strange resonance stirring in her blood. Recognition, as though some part of her had been here before. The radio crackled, static overwhelming the weather advisories she'd been half listening to. Catherine reached to adjust it when movement caught her eye, a massive shadow loping across the road ahead, too large for a deer or even an elk. Her foot instinctively hit the brake, the worst possible reaction on the ice-slicked asphalt. The world tilted and spun. The guardrail that separated the road from a 1,000-foot drop approached at alarming speed. Catherine had time for one clear thought, oddly calm amid the chaos. "So this is how I follow you, Mother." Then darkness, complete and profound. When consciousness returned, it came in fragments, sensory impressions rather than coherent thought. The scent of wood smoke and pine, the distant murmur of voices, the textured feel of hand-woven blankets against her skin, the taste of copper in her mouth. Catherine opened her eyes to a ceiling of exposed wooden beams, massive and ancient, crossing high above her. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating dancing dust motes in the air. She lay on a bed that was not her own, in a room she had never seen before. Panic rose in her throat, adrenaline flooding her system. She tried to sit up and immediately regretted it as pain lanced through her temple. A soft groan escaped her lips. "Easy now," a woman's voice cautioned from nearby. "You had quite a crash." Catherine turned her head carefully toward the voice. A woman with copper skin and sharp, assessing eyes approached the bed. She moved with a fluid grace that seemed almost predatory, though her expression held no malice, only professional concern. She appeared to be in her 50s, with silver streaking her long black hair pulled back in a practical braid. "Where am I?" Catherine managed, her voice sounding foreign to her own ears, raspy from disuse. "How long have I been here?" "Silvercrest Lodge," the woman replied, reaching for Catherine's wrist with practiced movements, checking her pulse. 2 days. I'm Gaia Whitehawk, healer for the community. You're fortunate to be alive, Miss Morgan." Catherine stared at her. "How do you know my name?" "Your driver's license," Gaia answered smoothly. "And your research credentials. A wildlife biologist specializing in predator behavior. Impressive." Something in the way the woman emphasized predator sent a shiver through Catherine, though she couldn't have explained why. "My Jeep?" "Beyond salvage, I'm afraid, but you were pulled out before the worst happened." Memory flashed, disjointed and uncertain. The shadow on the road, the sense of falling, and then something else. A presence. Strong arms lifting her from wreckage. The scent of forest, and something wild, primal. "Who found me?" Catherine asked. Before Gaia could answer, the door opened, and 2 others entered. A younger woman with a cascade of dark hair and a tall, broad-shouldered man whose presence immediately filled the room in some indefinable way. Both moved with that same fluid grace Catherine had noticed in Gaia. "She's awake," the younger woman said, her tone suggesting this was more than simple observation. How could you possibly know that from outside? Catherine asked, unease prickling along her spine. The three exchanged glances that did nothing to calm Catherine's rising apprehension. You're in Silvercrest territory, Gaia said instead of answering directly. Garrett found you after your car crashed. He brought you here for healing. Catherine looked at the man, assuming he must be Garrett. He remained silent, studying her with an intensity that should have felt invasive, but somehow didn't. He was older than she'd initially thought, perhaps mid-40s, with streaks of silver at his temples, contrasting with otherwise dark hair. His face bore the weathered look of someone who spent most of his life outdoors, and a scar ran along his jawline, disappearing beneath his collar. "Thank you," Catherine said, meeting his gaze directly. "I owe you my life." A flicker of something passed across his face, too quickly to interpret. "You smell different now," Gaia said abruptly, her tone clinical yet tinged with something like wonder. "The accident changed you." Catherine blinked, confusion washing over her. "Excuse me?" The younger woman leaned forward, inhaling deeply in a gesture so strange that Catherine instinctively recoiled. "She's right," the woman confirmed, excitement evident in her voice. "You're not what you were before." "What my colleagues are trying to say," Garrett spoke for the first time, his voice a deep baritone that seemed to resonate in Catherine's chest, "is that you've awakened as an Omega." The word hung in the air between them. Omega. It should have meant nothing to Catherine, should have sounded like nonsense, yet something deep within her responded to it, recognized it like a name she'd forgotten she had. "I don't understand," Catherine said, fingers curling around the edge of the blanket. "What happened to me? What's an Omega?" Gaia's expression softened marginally. Sometimes trauma can trigger dormant shifts in humans with certain ancestral connections. Your mother never told you about your lineage, did she? The mention of her mother sent a jolt through Catherine. "You knew my mother?" "Everyone knew Elizabeth," Garrett said, his voice dropping an octave, something like old pain coloring the words. "She was to be bonded to my father 25 years ago, before she fled." The room seemed to tilt around Catherine, though she hadn't moved. Her mother, quiet, cautious Elizabeth Morgan, who had spent Catherine's entire childhood looking over her shoulder, who had taught at small colleges and kept to herself, who had disappeared 3 years ago on what she'd called a research trip into these very mountains, had been part of this place, part of these people. "An Omega is rare," the younger woman continued, something like envy coloring her tone. "The peacekeeper, the heart of the pack. You'll feel others' emotions, calm their storms." "I don't want to feel anyone's emotions," Catherine said, sitting up despite the pain, determination overriding caution. "I want answers. What are you people? What was my mother to you? And what happened to me in that crash?" The three exchanged glances again, a silent communication passing between them that Catherine couldn't decipher but could somehow sense, like a current of electricity running through the air. "Show her," Garrett commanded, and Gaia nodded once, reaching into a drawer beside the bed. She withdrew a small mirror and handed it to Catherine. With trepidation, Catherine raised it to her face, expecting bruises, cuts, some evidence of the crash. What she saw instead made her breath catch. Her eyes, once a dark brown, now held flecks of amber gold around the pupils, giving them an almost luminous quality in the sunlight. More shocking still was the strand of silver running through her otherwise chestnut hair, starting at her left temple. "What did you do to me?" she whispered, unable to tear her gaze from this altered reflection. "We did nothing," Garrett said firmly. "The change was already in your blood. Your accident merely accelerated what would have happened eventually." Catherine lowered the mirror, struggling to process his words. "You're saying I'm what? A werewolf?" The word felt ridiculous leaving her lips, the stuff of horror movies and teenage fantasy novels. Yet the three people before her did not laugh or deny it. "We prefer shifter," the younger woman said, a hint of amusement in her tone, though the old term is accurate enough in its way. Catherine's scientific mind rebelled against the impossibility of what they were suggesting. Yet she had always trusted her senses, and every one of them was telling her these people were not lying, that there was something fundamentally different about them, about this place, about herself now. She closed her eyes, reaching for the rational explanation that must exist. A concussion, hallucinations. Perhaps she was still unconscious, trapped in some elaborate dream constructed by her injured brain. Then she felt something in her pocket, a small weight she hadn't noticed before. Her hand moved to it automatically, fingers closing around cool metal. It was a pendant, a crescent moon crafted from what appeared to be silver, hung on a simple leather cord. Catherine drew it out, staring at it with growing recognition. "This was my mother's," she whispered. "She always wore it. After she disappeared, I couldn't find it anywhere." She looked up sharply. "How did it get in my pocket?" The atmosphere in the room changed instantly. All three visitors stiffened, their attention snapping to the pendant in Catherine's palm. "The moonstone," Gaia breathed, something like reverence in her voice. "It returns," the younger woman whispered. Garrett's reaction was the most pronounced. His posture shifted subtly, becoming more alert, more commanding, and his eyes fixed on the pendant with an intensity that made Catherine's skin prickle. "Where did you get that?" he asked, his voice carefully controlled. "I told you it was my mother's," Catherine replied, instinctively closing her fingers around the pendant protectively. "She never took it off until she disappeared. I've been looking for it ever since." "Because it called to you," Garrett said. Not a question, but a statement of fact. "As it called to her before you." Outside, the wind picked up suddenly, rattling the windows. Something in the sound reminded Catherine of the voices she'd thought she heard in the storm. A chorus of howls that seemed to form words just beyond understanding. "I need to know what's happening," she said, summoning her courage. "All of it. No more cryptic statements." Garrett nodded once, decision made. "You will know everything, Catherine Morgan. You have that right." He turned to the others. "Leave us. I will explain." Gaia looked like she might object, but after a moment she inclined her head and moved toward the door, the younger woman following. "Remember who she is, Garrett," Gaia said quietly, before closing the door behind them. Alone with this intimidating stranger, Catherine felt a moment of trepidation, but curiosity and determination had always outweighed her caution, a trait that had served her well in her research even as it complicated her personal life. "First," Garrett said, moving to sit in a chair near the bed, his movements controlled and deliberate, "understand that what I'm about to tell you will change how you see the world, how you see yourself. There's no going back from this knowledge." "I crossed that line the moment I woke up with different-colored eyes," Catherine replied dryly. "I'm a scientist. I deal in facts, not fear." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Like your mother in that way, stubborn, brave." The smile faded. It didn't save her from what followed. Catherine leaned forward. "Is she alive? Do you know where she is?" Pain flickered across his features. "I don't know. We've been searching since you were found with the moonstone. It's complicated." "Then uncomplicate it," Catherine insisted. "Start at the beginning." Garrett drew a deep breath, seeming to organize his thoughts. "The Silvercrest Pack is the oldest werewolf community in North America. We came with the earliest settlers, fleeing persecution in Europe, and found sanctuary in these mountains." "Pack," Catherine repeated. "As in wolves." "As in family," he corrected. "Though yes, we carry the wolf within us, can take that form when needed. We've lived alongside humans for centuries, keeping to ourselves, protecting our territory, maintaining the balance." "And my mother was one of you," Catherine said, fitting pieces together. "Elizabeth Morgan was born Omega to our pack, rare and precious. In our society, alphas lead, providing strength and protection. Betas form the backbone, the warriors and workers. But Omegas—" His expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Omegas are the heart. They feel the emotional bonds between pack members, can heal spiritual wounds, bring peace where there is conflict." He glanced at the pendant still clutched in Catherine's hand. "That moonstone is a symbol of authority in our pack, passed down through generations. It was given to your mother when she was chosen to bond with my father, James Blackwood, the Alpha of Silvercrest. The night before their bonding ceremony, she vanished, taking the moonstone with her. The pack has been weakened ever since. Catherine tried to reconcile this information with the quiet, solitary woman who had raised her. She never told me any of this, never even hinted at it. She was hiding you, Garrett said simply. From us, perhaps. From what you were born to be, certainly. Born to be, Catherine repeated, a chill running through her. You're saying I was always going to become this? An Omega? Your abilities with animals, Garrett said, watching her closely. Your instinctive understanding of predator behavior that made your research so groundbreaking. Your sensitivity to the emotions of others. These weren't coincidences, Catherine. They were signs of your heritage asserting itself, despite whatever measures Elizabeth took to suppress it. Catherine thought of her inexplicable connection to the wolves she studied, how they seemed to accept her presence in ways they never did with other researchers, how she could sense their moods, anticipate their behaviors beyond what careful observation alone could explain. She had attributed it to intuition developed through years of study, but now— Why would she hide this from me? Catherine asked, genuine pain in her voice. Why keep me from knowing who I really am? Garrett's expression darkened. That is the question that has haunted our pack for 25 years. Was it fear? Shame? Or did she know something we didn't? He leaned forward slightly. What did she tell you about these mountains before she disappeared? Catherine cast her mind back to that last conversation, one she had replayed countless times in the years since. She said she needed to return, to face something she'd run from long ago. She said— Catherine paused, the words taking on new significance now. She said the mountains remembered, even when people tried to forget. Something flickered in Garrett's eyes. And then she came back here, alone. To find you? Catherine asked. Perhaps, he acknowledged. Or perhaps to face the Ravenwood pack. Another group like yours? Not like ours, Garrett said, and for the first time a hint of growl entered his voice. Ravenwood was once our sister pack, protectors of the eastern slopes. But their ways changed over generations. They embraced dominance over harmony, power over balance. They've been our enemies for over 100 years, and the conflict has only worsened since the moonstone disappeared. As if responding to its mention, the pendant in Catherine's hand grew subtly warmer. She opened her palm, startled to see a faint blue luminescence emanating from its surface, pulsing gently like a heartbeat. It recognizes you, Garrett said quietly, watching the phenomenon with evident fascination. It never did that for Elizabeth, not even when she was chosen. The stories say the moonstone only glows for those of true royal blood. Royal? Catherine couldn't keep the incredulity from her voice. Now you're saying I'm some kind of werewolf princess? The corner of his mouth quirked upward. Our hierarchies aren't quite so medieval, but yes, in essence. The moonstone responding to you suggests your lineage is more significant than we realized. His gaze sharpened, which raises questions about your father. Catherine stiffened. My father died before I was born. At least, that's what my mother told me. Did she ever name him? William, that's all she would say. Catherine had long ago given up trying to extract more information. Elizabeth had been immovable on the subject. Recognition flashed across Garrett's face, quickly masked. I see. You know who he was, Catherine said, not a question. I have suspicions, he replied carefully. If I'm right, it would explain much about why Elizabeth fled, why she hid you for so long. Before Catherine could press him further, a commotion arose outside, voices raised in alarm. Garrett was on his feet instantly, his posture changing from contemplative to alert in a heartbeat. He moved to the window, scanning the forest edge visible beyond the glass. What is it? Catherine asked, sensing his tension. Ravenwood, he said grimly. They've crossed our boundary. They shouldn't have been able to get so close without our sentries detecting them. He turned to Catherine, decision clear in his expression. Stay here. You're not ready for what's coming." "If this involves my mother, my heritage, I have a right to know," Catherine countered, struggling to stand despite the lingering dizziness. "I didn't come all this way for half-truths and protection I never asked for." Admiration briefly flickered in his eyes. "Your mother's daughter, indeed." He hesitated, then gave a short nod. "Stay behind me, then, and keep the moonstone hidden. If they sense its presence, or yours." He didn't finish the sentence, but the gravity of his tone made the warning clear. Catherine quickly slipped the pendant into her pocket, though she could still feel its warmth against her thigh through the fabric. Garrett led her from the room into a wide hallway of the same rustic, grand construction. The lodge was larger than Catherine had imagined, with the air of a mountain retreat that had stood for generations. People moved purposefully through the corridors, some nodding respectfully to Garrett as they passed, others casting curious glances at Catherine. "How many of you are there?" she asked quietly as they descended a broad staircase. 87 in Silvercrest proper," Garrett replied. "Another 40 or so who maintain human lives in surrounding communities but return for important gatherings." "And no one suspects? No one has discovered what you are?" "There have been close calls over the centuries," he acknowledged, "but humans see what they expect to see, and our kind has become adept at hiding in plain sight. Besides," a hint of wry humor entered his tone, "in an age of conspiracy theories and supernatural fiction, who would believe the truth if they heard it?" They reached the main floor, a vast open space dominated by a stone fireplace large enough to stand in. Through tall windows, Catherine could see people gathering on the lawns, forming a loose semicircle facing the forest edge. Tension radiated from them, palpable even to Catherine's untrained senses. Garrett led her to a side entrance rather than the main doors. "We'll observe from here first," he said, "until we know their intentions." As they stepped onto a covered porch, Catherine felt it immediately, an oppressive pressure that had nothing to do with the mountain altitude. The air itself seemed charged with hostility, with challenge. Instinctively, she moved closer to Garrett, whose solid presence provided an anchor against the unsettling sensation. A group emerged from the tree line, perhaps a dozen people moving with the same predatory grace Catherine had noted in the Silvercrest members, but with a harder edge to it. At their center walked a man whose very bearing proclaimed authority, tall and lean, with a shock of silver-white hair, despite a face that suggested he was no older than Garrett. A jagged scar crossed one eye, giving him a fierce, lupine appearance even in human form. "Victor Stone," Garrett said quietly. "Alpha of Ravenwood." Victor halted his group at a respectful distance from the Silvercrest defenders. His gaze swept the assembled pack before settling unerringly on Garrett, despite their position to the side of the main gathering. "Blackwood," he called, his voice carrying easily across the open space. "We come under truce banner. The last 3 times you crossed our boundaries, it wasn't for friendly conversation," Garrett replied, stepping forward onto the lawn, subtly positioning himself so Catherine remained partly concealed behind him. "Why should today be different?" Victor smiled, the expression failing to reach his eyes. "Because today, I bring news that concerns us both." His gaze shifted, looking past Garrett directly at Catherine with unnerving intensity. "And concerns your guest as well, I think." Murmurs rippled through the Silvercrest pack as heads turned toward Catherine. She felt suddenly exposed, vulnerable, yet at the same time a strange calm settled over her. Whatever was coming, she would face it head-on, as she had faced every challenge in her life. "Speak your piece and be gone," Garrett said, tension evident in the set of his shoulders. 3 nights ago, a woman was brought to our territory, Victor said, his gaze never leaving Catherine. Injured, exhausted, half-mad with exposure. She carried no identification, but she spoke a name in her delirium, Elizabeth Morgan. Catherine couldn't suppress her sharp intake of breath, which Victor noted with evident satisfaction. "I thought that might interest you," he said, "especially since she also spoke of a daughter, of the Moonstone, and of a prophecy long forgotten by both our packs. If you've harmed her," Garrett began, a growl entering his voice. Victor held up a hand. "She is under my protection, receiving our healer's care. but her condition is precarious. She refuses to fully heal until she sees her daughter. His gaze locked with Catherine's. Until she sees you, Catherine Morgan. Catherine stepped forward instinctively, but Garrett's arm shot out, barring her path. Convenient timing, he said to Victor, suspicion clear in his tone, that Elizabeth would appear in your territory just as her daughter awakens among us. Victor shrugged, the gesture too casual to be genuine. The currents of fate run deep and swift. Perhaps the Moonstone called her home, as it called her daughter. Or perhaps you've held her prisoner these 25 years, Garrett countered, waiting for the right moment to use her as bait. The atmosphere tensed further, members of both packs shifting subtly into more aggressive stances. Catherine could feel the wave of emotions emanating from them, anger and fear and suspicion swirling like a storm cloud. Believe what you will, Victor said coolly. The invitation stands. The daughter may come to Ravenwood territory under safe passage to see her mother. 3 days from now, at the old boundary stone. He paused, then added with deliberate precision, alone. Before Garrett could respond, a commotion arose from the Silvercrest defenders. An elderly man pushed through the ranks, his weathered face creased with urgency. Despite his apparent age, he moved with surprising vigor. "Marcus," Garrett acknowledged, concern evident in his tone, "you should be resting." "No time for that," the old man replied, his voice carrying the gravel of decades. He turned to Victor, eyes narrowing. "You speak of prophecy, Stone. Tell me, do the words, 'when moon and blood combine in one,' mean anything to you?" Victor's composure faltered momentarily, genuine surprise crossing his features. "How do you know those words?" "Because I was there when the last seer of Silvercrest spoke them, 50 years ago," Marcus replied, "before your father had him killed to silence the prediction." Murmurs rippled through both packs. Catherine felt the moonstone grow warmer in her pocket, responding to the tension in the air or perhaps to the words themselves. "Ancient history," Victor said dismissively, though something in his eyes had changed. "Irrelevant to our current situation." "Is it?" Marcus challenged. "Or is that why you've suddenly found Elizabeth Morgan after all these years? Because you've learned who her daughter truly is?" Catherine felt Garrett's attention shift to her, questioning, speculative. She wished she understood what was happening, what hidden currents of history and prophecy were swirling around her. 3 days, Victor repeated, ignoring the old man's questions. "The boundary stone. We'll bring Elizabeth." His gaze lingered on Catherine. "Choose wisely, Omega. Your mother's life depends on it." With that, he turned and led his people back into the forest, leaving a wake of tension behind them. As soon as they disappeared among the trees, the Silvercrest pack erupted into urgent conversation, voices overlapping in concern and speculation. Garrett turned to Catherine, his expression grave. "Now you understand the danger. Ravenwood wants something from you, from the Moonstone. They'll use your mother to get it." "Then I'll go," Catherine said simply. "She's my mother." "It's a trap," Garrett countered. "Victor Stone hasn't survived as Alpha this long by being forthright." "I don't care," Catherine insisted, feeling the Omega within her responding to the thought of her mother in pain, needing her. "I've spent 3 years searching for her. I won't abandon her now, trap or no trap." Something like respect flickered in Garrett's eyes. "There's another way, one that doesn't involve walking into Ravenwood territory unprotected." He glanced at Marcus, who had joined them on the porch. "The old tunnels, if they still exist." Marcus nodded slowly. "They exist. Untraveled for decades, but they exist. A passage from our territory to theirs, unknown to the current generation of Ravenwood." "Then we use them," Garrett decided, not to surrender to Victor's demands, but to verify his claims and extract Elizabeth if she's truly there. He looked at Catherine. "We'll need time to prepare, to train you in at least the basics of your abilities." "Train me?" Catherine echoed. "You're Omega now," Garrett said. "That brings responsibilities, abilities you need to understand. And if Marcus is right about the prophecy, if you're more than just an Omega—" He trailed off, glancing at the old man. "What prophecy?" Catherine demanded, frustration mounting. What aren't you telling me?" Marcus studied her face for a long moment, as if searching for something. "There was a prediction, made when your mother was just a girl. When moon and blood combine in one, when alpha strength and omega heart unite, the shadow's reign shall be undone." "And what does that have to do with me?" Catherine asked, though a part of her already suspected the answer. "Everything," Marcus said simply. "Because if I'm right about who your father was, you carry both bloodlines within you, alpha and omega both, a combination not seen in generations." Catherine felt the weight of his words, of the expectations suddenly placed upon her. Her hand moved to her pocket, to the warmth of the moonstone, a connection to the mother she sought, and the heritage she was only beginning to understand. Garrett's gaze followed the movement, understanding in his eyes. "The moonstone has returned for a reason, Catherine, and I think that reason is you." The wind shifted, carrying with it the distant sound of wolves howling, a mournful chorus that seemed to echo Catherine's own conflicting emotions. She had come seeking her mother, seeking answers. Instead, she had found a world beyond imagination, a heritage she'd never known, and a destiny she hadn't asked for. As the sun began to set behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the Silver Crest territory, Catherine made her decision. She would find her mother. She would learn the truth about her father, about the prophecy, about the power suddenly awakening within her. And she would face whatever came next, not as a victim of circumstance, but as what she had always been beneath the surface. A woman of strength and determination, daughter of mysteries, heir to ancient power. The Omega had awakened, and the Moonstone had found its way home. Night fell over Silvercrest Lodge with an ancient patience, stars emerging one by one until the sky blazed with light undiminished by city glow. Catherine stood on the balcony outside her room, watching the wilderness beyond. The mountains loomed as dark sentinels against the starscape, their presence both comforting and intimidating. Somewhere in those shadowed peaks, her mother might be waiting, prisoner or patient. Catherine couldn't know. The moonstone rested in her palm, its subtle warmth a counterpoint to the mountain chill. In darkness, its blue luminescence was more pronounced, pulsing with a rhythm that seemed to match her heartbeat. She had tried to remove it several times during the evening, but each attempt had filled her with inexplicable dread, as though setting aside the pendant might sever some essential connection. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" The voice came from behind her, and Catherine turned to find Marcus, the elderly man from earlier, standing in the doorway. Despite his apparent age, he moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had earned his place in the world through decades of experience. "The night," he clarified, stepping onto the balcony beside her. "When you've lived as long as I have, you come to appreciate the constants, the mountains, the stars, the cycle of the moon." Catherine nodded, sensing he hadn't sought her out to discuss astronomy. "You knew my mother." "Since she was a child," Marcus confirmed, his weathered face softening with memory. "Elizabeth had a wildness to her, even then, an independence that set her apart from other Omegas." He glanced at the moonstone in Catherine's hand, and a connection to that stone that puzzled our elders. "Like my connection to it," Catherine said, not a question. Marcus studied her with eyes that seemed to see beyond surface appearances. "Perhaps stronger. The stone has always been tied to Silvercrest's fate, but never has it glowed as it does for you, not even for your mother." "And that has something to do with this prophecy you mentioned," Catherine pressed, "about moon and blood combining in one." A long silence stretched between them as Marcus seemed to weigh his words carefully. "Prophecies are dangerous things," he said finally. "They shape events as much as predict them. People hear what they expect to hear, see what they fear to see." "I don't fear the truth," Catherine said firmly. "I've spent my life as a scientist, following evidence wherever it leads. What I fear is being kept in the dark while others decide my fate based on words spoken 50 years ago." A smile touched the old man's lips. "You have your mother's directness." He turned to face the mountains again. "Very well. 50 years ago, the last true seer of Silvercrest spoke of a child yet unborn who would carry both alpha strength and omega compassion, a union of bloodlines thought incompatible. This child would return the moonstone to its rightful place and end the shadow's reign. "What shadow?" Catherine asked. "That's where interpretations differ," Marcus replied. "Some believe it refers to Ravenwood's growing influence. Others think it speaks of something older, darker, a force that has manipulated our kind for generations." Catherine studied the moonstone, its light seeming to brighten as they spoke. "And you think I'm this child of prophecy because of who your father was," Marcus said quietly. "William Timberlake was not just any werewolf, Catherine. He was the last alpha of the Eastwood Pack, guardians of the Southern Territories. Their bloodline was unique, a blend of European werewolf heritage and Native American shapeshifter traditions, particularly Cherokee." "Like Gaia," Catherine noted, remembering the healer's distinctive features. Marcus nodded. "Gaia's grandmother was Eastwood before the pack was destroyed 30 years ago, officially by a wildfire, but those of us who remember believe Ravenwood was responsible. And my father survived. He found sanctuary with us, wounded in body and spirit. James Blackwood, Garrett's father, offered him protection. That's when he met your mother." Understanding dawned. An alpha from one pack, an omega from another. "Forbidden," Marcus confirmed. "Not just unconventional, but dangerous according to our traditions. Alpha and omega traits were believed incompatible in offspring, producing unstable, conflicted individuals. The packs enforced separation for centuries based on this belief. Yet my mother and father defied this. They loved each other," Marcus said simply, "and in doing so, they fulfilled the first part of the prophecy before either realized what they had set in motion." Catherine's scientific mind rebelled against such mysticism, yet she couldn't deny the evidence before her own eyes, in her own changing body. "If what you're saying is true, why did my mother run? Why hide me all these years?" Pain flickered across Marcus's features. "That I cannot say with certainty. She vanished before your birth, taking the moonstone. Some believe she had betrayed us to Ravenwood, others that she fled to protect her unborn child from those who would use the prophecy for their own ends." He sighed heavily, "including, perhaps, some within Silvercrest itself." Before Catherine could press for clarification, a commotion arose from the forest's edge. Howls echoed through the night, urgent and alarming. Marcus stiffened, head turning sharply toward the sound. "Sentries," he explained grimly. "Ravenwood tests our boundaries again." On the lawn below, figures emerged from the lodge, Garrett at their center, issuing rapid commands. Even from a distance, Catherine could sense his authority, the natural command that radiated from him. "You should rest," Marcus advised, turning to leave. "Tomorrow your training begins, and you'll need your strength." "For what exactly?" Catherine asked. The old man paused at the doorway. "To become what you already are, Catherine Morgan. Daughter of two bloodlines, keeper of the moonstone, and perhaps the only hope for peace our people have seen in generations." With those weighty words hanging in the air, he departed, leaving Catherine alone with the night and her thoughts. Below, she watched as Garrett and several others loped toward the forest, their movements suggesting they had already begun the transformation into their wolf forms. The scientist in her hungered to witness such a biological impossibility. The daughter in her yearned for answers about her mother. And something new, something awakening within her, responded to the howls in the distance with an instinct older than conscious thought. Sleep, when it finally came, was filled with dreams of running through moonlit forests, of ancient powers and unseen dangers, and of amber eyes watching her from shadows. Morning arrived with golden light and the scent of pine carried on mountain breezes. Catherine woke feeling oddly refreshed despite her troubled dreams. The aches from her accident had largely subsided, replaced by a vibrancy she hadn't experienced before, as though her senses had been fine-tuned overnight. She dressed in clothes someone had left for her, sturdy jeans and a flannel shirt that fit surprisingly well, then made her way downstairs. The lodge buzzed with activity, people moving with purpose, conversations halting briefly as she passed before resuming with greater intensity. She felt their curiosity, their assessment, emotions radiating from them in a way she could almost visualize, like heat shimmer on asphalt. In the great room, she found Garrett conferring with a group that included Gaia and several others she hadn't met. They stood around a table spread with maps, their expressions serious. Garrett looked up as she approached, his face showing signs of a long night. "Catherine, good. You're awake. We have much to discuss." "Starting with what happened last night," she said, joining them at the table. The maps showed the surrounding territory in meticulous detail, certain areas marked with symbols she didn't recognize. "Ravenwood sent scouts," Garrett explained, indicating points on the map's eastern edge, "testing our defenses, gauging our responses, standard tactics before a larger incursion." "Or misdirection," suggested a stocky man with salt and pepper hair, his accent suggesting New England origins. "Stone's never been this bold without reason." "He believes he has reason," Garrett replied, glancing at Catherine. "The Moonstone has returned, and with it, the subject of prophecy." Catherine felt the weight of several gazes upon her, assessing, speculating. The Moonstone, still around her neck beneath her shirt, seemed to warm in response. "Let's focus on what we know," Gaia interjected practically. "Ravenwood is mobilizing. They claim to have Elizabeth Morgan, and in 3 days they expect Catherine at the Boundary Stone." "A trap," said the New Englander bluntly. "Undoubtedly," Garrett agreed, "but one we can turn to our advantage if Catherine is prepared." "Prepared how?" Catherine asked, wariness creeping into her tone. Garrett's gaze met hers directly. "You've awakened as an Omega, but your abilities are untrained, instinctual. For what's coming, you'll need control, understanding." "I'm a quick study," Catherine said, determination rising within her. "If it helps me find my mother, I'll learn whatever I need to." Something like approval flickered in Garrett's eyes. "Good. We begin immediately." He addressed the others. "Continue preparations as discussed. Double the patrols on the eastern borders, and send word to our allies in the north. If Ravenwood is truly mobilizing, we may need reinforcements." The group dispersed efficiently, leaving Catherine alone with Garrett and Gaia. The healer approached Catherine, her expression professional but kind. "How do you feel this morning?" she asked. "Any lingering pain from your accident?" "None," Catherine admitted. "Just everything seems more intense. Colors, scents, sounds." Gaia nodded. "Your enhanced senses are awakening. As an Omega, you'll experience the world differently than you did as a human, particularly emotions, both your own and others." "I noticed that last night," Catherine said. "I could feel the pack's curiosity, their wariness." "A fundamental Omega ability," Garrett said, "and the foundation of your other gifts. Gaia will guide you through the basics today. I have matters to attend to, but I'll join you this afternoon for the more practical aspects of your training." With that cryptic statement, he departed, leaving Catherine with the Cherokee healer. "He doesn't waste words, does he?" Catherine observed. A smile touched Gaia's lips. "Garrett Blackwood carries his father's responsibilities with fewer words and more action. It serves the pack well, even if his social graces occasionally suffer." She gestured toward a side door. "Come, we'll begin somewhere quieter, away from the emotions of the pack." Gaia led her to a circular room Catherine hadn't seen before, its walls lined with herbs and crystals, a skylight in the domed ceiling allowing sunlight to pool on the wooden floor. The air smelled of sage and cedar, creating an atmosphere of calm focus. "This is the heart room," Gaia explained, "traditionally where Omegas trained and worked. It's been empty since your mother left." Catherine moved to the center of the sunbeam, feeling its warmth seep into her skin. "What exactly am I supposed to do?" "First, understand the extent of your gifts," Gaia said, moving around the room, adjusting curtains to modulate the light. "An Omega's primary ability is emotional influence, soothing pain, calming rage, strengthening courage. But most importantly, an Omega creates and maintains the bonds that unite a pack, making it stronger than the sum of its parts." "Like a wolf pack's social structure," Catherine said, making connections to her research. "The complex relationships that allow cooperation and survival." Precisely, Gaia approved. But where ordinary wolves maintain these bonds through physical proximity and interaction, werewolves can create deeper connections, spiritual links that transcend distance and even time. For the next several hours, Gaia guided Catherine through exercises designed to help her recognize and control her emerging abilities. First, simple meditation, focusing on her own emotional state, then more complex tasks aimed at extending her awareness beyond her physical body. Visualize the pack bonds, Gaia instructed as Catherine sat cross-legged in the sunlight. They're like threads connecting every member to the Alpha, and through him to each other. Catherine concentrated, extending her awareness as directed. At first, there was nothing but her own thoughts, chaotic and skeptical. Then slowly, she began to sense them, filaments of emotion and connection radiating outward like a vast, complex web. At the center was Garrett, his presence a burning star of power and purpose. From him extended countless threads, connecting to each pack member with varying intensities and qualities. Some bonds were bright with loyalty, others tempered with respectful caution, a few fragile with unresolved conflicts. "I can feel them," she whispered, amazed. "All of them." "Good," Gaia approved. "Now follow one thread. Anyone in particular?" Without hesitation, Catherine's awareness followed the strongest connection, the tether binding her to Garrett. She found him immediately, felt his determination, his focus, his underlying concern for the pack. He was in the forest, inspecting boundary markers, issuing commands to sentries positioned strategically throughout Silvercrest territory. "I can see what he's doing," Catherine said, surprised at the clarity of her perception. "He's worried about the northern approach, thinks it's vulnerable." Gaia's surprise was evident in her voice. "You shouldn't be able to perceive specific thoughts, only general emotional states, not without a completed bond." Catherine's concentration broke, her eyes opening. "What does that mean?" The healer studied her with renewed interest. "It means your Omega abilities are exceptionally strong, perhaps due to your dual heritage. Or perhaps—" She hesitated. "Perhaps what?" "Perhaps you and Garrett are naturally compatible in a way that transcends normal pack dynamics," Gaia said carefully. "It happens rarely, but when it does, it creates a foundation for bonds of unusual strength." Before Catherine could pursue this unsettling possibility, a distant howl echoed through the lodge, urgent and alarming. Gaia stood immediately, her expression tightening. "Ravenwood," she said grimly. "They've crossed our secondary boundary." Catherine rose as well, adrenaline spiking. "I thought they were giving us 3 days." "Victor Stone has never been one to honor his word," Gaia replied, moving swiftly toward the door. "Come, we need to get you somewhere secure." They hurried from the heart room, following the sounds of commotion through the lodge. Pack members rushed about, some shifting to wolf form as they headed for the exits, others gathering weapons or ushering the younger and older members toward what Catherine assumed were safer areas. "This way," Gaia urged, leading her toward a side entrance. "We'll circle through the eastern woods to the shelter caves. The pack has used them for generations during attacks." As they stepped outside, the forest's scents and sounds hit Catherine with new intensity. Her enhanced senses picked up far more than she was accustomed to: the musty odor of deer that had passed through hours ago, the distant rushing of a stream, the subtle shift in the wind carrying the acrid smell of approaching enemies. "They're close," she whispered. Gaia nodded grimly. "Stay near me. If we encounter hostiles, I'll hold them off while you run. Find Garrett at all costs." They moved swiftly through the trees, Gaia setting a punishing pace. Catherine followed as best she could, surprised by how her body seemed to know what to do, moving with a grace and agility she'd never possessed before. The forest thickened around them, ancient trees looming overhead, their canopy blocking much of the afternoon sun. The shadows deepened, bringing with them a sense of unease that prickled along Catherine's spine. Gaia stopped suddenly, her posture alert, head tilted as she scented the air. "Something's wrong," she murmured. "The trail is too quiet." Catherine focused, extending her awareness as she'd been taught. Gaia was right. The normal sounds of the forest had fallen silent. No birds sang, No small creatures rustled in the underbrush. Even the insects had stilled. "We're being watched," Catherine whispered, the moonstone growing warm against her skin beneath her shirt. "Clever Omega," came a voice from the shadows. A figure stepped out from behind a massive oak. Catherine recognized him immediately as Jason Reed, the young messenger who had been at Garrett's side during the morning's strategy meeting. Gaia shifted instantly, her body flowing into wolf form with fluid grace, a russet-colored wolf with Gaia's intense eyes, positioning herself between Catherine and the threat. Jason smiled, and in that smile, Catherine saw something wrong, something inhuman. "The Shadow Alliance sends its regards," he said, his eyes beginning to glow an unnatural violet. "And thanks you for leading the Omega right to me." "You're working for Ravenwood," Catherine breathed, pieces falling into place. "You've been feeding them information all along." Jason's smile widened, something inhuman in its curve. "For generations, my bloodline has served the true masters of our kind." His form rippled slightly, like a mirage in desert heat. "We who understand the natural order." Gaia growled, her wolf form tense and ready to attack. "The natural order," Catherine echoed, keeping her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. "Manipulating packs against each other, trying to capture my mother, hunting me down. That's your idea of natural?" "Necessary pruning," Jason said dismissively. "Werewolves are tools, vessels of power to be harvested, nothing more." He stepped closer, eyes fixed on Catherine's chest, where the moonstone lay hidden beneath her shirt. "That stone has fueled the Alliance for centuries. Combined with Omega energy and Royal Alpha blood, it will sustain us for centuries more." Gaia lunged without warning, her powerful body aimed directly at Jason's throat. But he moved with impossible speed, sidestepping her attack and catching her mid-leap. With a casual strength that belied his slender form, he hurled her against a massive tree trunk. The impact shook the forest, leaves raining down as Gaia crumpled at the base, unmoving. "Gaia!" Catherine cried, starting toward her. "She lives," Jason said coldly. "For now. The Alliance prefers you come willingly, but they will accept damaged goods if necessary." He extended a hand. "Come with me, and your friends will be spared further pain." Catherine backed away, her hand rising to the moonstone concealed beneath her shirt. "You're lying. The Alliance means to drain me, use me." "Use?" "Yes. Drain? Eventually." Jason tilted his head, considering. "But not before you've served your purpose, which is to lure every remaining royal bloodline into one place, of course." His violet eyes gleamed. "When Garrett falls into our trap, when the last Alpha descendants come to stand with him against Ravenwood, the Alliance will eliminate every potential threat in a single stroke." Horror washed over Catherine. "This whole conflict, Ravenwood, my awakening, it's all been orchestrated." "The Alliance has planned this for decades," Jason said with chilling pride. "Your mother's escape was unexpected, but in the end, it merely delayed the inevitable. Blood calls to blood, after all. You were bound to find your way here eventually." The moonstone burned against Catherine's skin, responding to her mounting anger. This creature and his masters had manipulated her entire life, had hunted her mother, and now planned to eliminate Garrett and anyone else who might stand against them. She thought of Garrett, his fierce protectiveness, his straightforward honor, the way he'd looked at her with respect rather than seeing her as something to be used. Something deep within Catherine hardened with resolve. She would not let them take this from her. Not her newfound heritage, not her connection to her mother, and certainly not her freedom to choose her own path. "You're right about one thing," she said, straightening her spine. "Blood does call to blood." And with that, she wrapped her hand around the moonstone and called for Garrett with every fiber of her being, sending her fear, her determination, and her location surging along the tether that connected them. The pendant flared with brilliant blue light, momentarily blinding Jason. His cry of surprise was cut short as a massive gray shape crashed through the underbrush, slamming into him with devastating force. Garrett in wolf form was more magnificent than Catherine had imagined, larger than any natural wolf, his silver-gray fur bristling with power, amber eyes blazing with rage. He positioned himself between Catherine and Jason, a growl emanating from deep in his chest that seemed to vibrate through the forest floor. Jason recovered quickly, his form shifting in ways that defied natural law, not to wolf, but to something else. Something with too many joints and violet eyes that multiplied across a face that stretched and contorted. The Alliance operative's human disguise fell away, revealing the creature beneath, ancient, powerful, and utterly inhuman. "Foolish Alpha," it taunted in a voice that no longer resembled Jason's. "We've consumed thousands of your kind. What makes you think you're different?" It struck with blinding speed, catching Garrett mid-lunge and slamming him to the ground. Claws that hadn't been visible moments before raked across his flank, drawing blood that steamed in the cool forest air. Catherine felt Garrett's pain as if it were her own, the connection between them vibrating with it. But beneath the pain was something else, determination, protective fury, and a desperate need to keep her safe, even at the cost of his own life. In that moment, Catherine understood what Gaia had meant. This connection wasn't just the normal bond between Alpha and pack member. It was something older, more primal, a recognition between complementary souls. The moonstone pulsed against her palm, and instinctively, Catherine knew what to do. "Garrett!" she called, her voice steadier than she had expected. "Trust me." Garrett's amber eyes found hers, even as he struggled beneath the Alliance creature's grip. In that gaze, she saw complete trust, absolute faith. Catherine closed her eyes, focusing on the connection between them, on the moonstone's warmth, on the ancient power that had been dormant in her blood until now. Following instinct older than conscious thought, she opened herself fully to that power, embracing both her Omega nature and the Alpha heritage that was her birthright. The moonstone's blue light engulfed her, spreading outward in pulsing waves. She felt Garrett's presence intensify, his energy merging with hers across their bond, not complete, not yet fully formed, but strong enough for this. "Blood calls to blood," she whispered, and let the power flow through her, through the stone, through their connection. The light solidified around Garrett, lifting him from beneath the creature's grasp. His wounds closed before Catherine's eyes, his strength visibly returning. The Alliance operative shrieked, recoiling from the blue radiance. "Impossible," it hissed. "The stone cannot be controlled without a completed bond." "You understand so little," Catherine said, the words coming from somewhere beyond conscious thought. "True power comes not from control, but from choice, from surrender." She met Garrett's gaze across the clearing. From trust, freely given. Garrett's wolf form seemed to absorb the light, his amber eyes taking on the same blue luminescence as the moonstone. When he moved again, it was with impossible speed and power, his jaws closing around the creature's throat before it could react. This time, when his teeth tore through its flesh, the wounds didn't close. The creature thrashed and screamed, its form destabilizing as Garrett's moonstone-enhanced strength overcame whatever dark power sustained it. With a final terrible shriek, it collapsed into itself, its body dissolving into a viscous fluid that seeped into the forest floor, leaving only a violet residue that steamed and then evaporated in the dappled sunlight. Silence fell over the clearing, broken only by Catherine's ragged breathing and the rustle of leaves overhead. Then came the sound of transformation, bones shifting, fur receding. Where the massive wolf had stood, Garrett now knelt, naked and bloodied but whole, his eyes still holding traces of the moonstone's light. He rose with predatory grace and crossed to Catherine, his gaze never leaving hers. When he reached her, his hands came up to frame her face with unexpected gentleness. "You called to me," he said, wonder in his voice. "Across the pack bonds. I heard you." "The moonstone," Catherine began. "Not just the stone," Garrett interrupted softly, one thumb tracing her cheekbone. "You. I felt you." The intensity in his gaze made it difficult for Catherine to breathe, to think clearly. This man who had been a stranger days ago now felt essential, a counterpoint to her own being. The scientist in her wanted to analyze this connection, to understand its biological and psychological components. but some deeper, newly awakened part of her simply accepted it as truth, as natural as breathing. A soft whine reminded them they weren't alone. Gaia was stirring, her wolf form struggling to stand. Garrett moved to her side, supporting her as she shifted back to human form, her movements stiff with pain. The messenger was an Alliance agent, Catherine explained, as Garrett helped Gaia to a fallen log where she could sit. He's been feeding them information about the pack, about me. Not just information, Gaia said grimly, wincing as she touched her ribs. They've infiltrated packs for generations. The conflict between Silvercrest and Ravenwood, the destruction of the Eastwood Pack, even your mother's flight, Catherine. All orchestrated to control the bloodlines, to prevent the prophecy's fulfillment. And to maintain access to the power of the Moonstone, Garrett added, his expression hardening. Without an Alpha-Omega pair of royal blood to activate its true potential, they could leech its energy for their own purposes. Catherine's hand closed around the pendant, feeling its steady pulse against her palm. What exactly is the Shadow Alliance? Jason wasn't just a werewolf, was he? No, Gaia confirmed. The Alliance consists of ancient entities that feed on supernatural energy, particularly that of shifters. They've disguised themselves as werewolves, humans, whatever form serves their purpose, manipulating from within. Like parasites, Catherine said, her scientific mind making connections. Using us as hosts, as energy sources. Precisely, Garrett nodded. For centuries, they've kept the packs divided, weakened, fighting amongst ourselves while they harvest our vitality. A distant howl cut through the forest, followed by another and another, creating an urgent chorus. Ravenwood has breached the southern perimeter, Garrett translated grimly, standing. With Alliance forces backing them. How many? Catherine asked, rising as well. Too many for a direct confrontation, Gaia said, struggling to her feet. We need to retreat, regroup. No, Catherine said, decision crystallizing within her. We need to stop running, stop reacting to their manipulations. If the Alliance wants me, wants the Moonstone, let's use that. Garrett studied her, respect and concern warring in his expression. What are you suggesting? A trap of our own, Catherine replied, the scientist in her analyzing variables, probabilities. They expect me to come to the Boundary Stone in 3 days. Instead, we bring the fight to them, on our terms. Ravenwood territory is well defended, Garrett cautioned. And if they truly have your mother, then we need to get her out, Catherine finished, and reveal the truth to Ravenwood about who's really been pulling their strings. Garrett considered her words, then nodded slowly. It could work, but we'd need a way into their territory undetected. The old tunnels Marcus mentioned, Catherine suggested. Garrett's eyes widened slightly. How did you know about those? Marcus told me last night. He said they connect our territory to Ravenwood's, unknown to the current generation. A smile touched Garrett's lips, respect evident in his expression. Your mother's daughter indeed. Strategic thinking was always Elizabeth's strength. Then we use the tunnels, Gaia agreed, her initial skepticism giving way to cautious optimism. But not tonight. We need time to prepare, to gather our strength. And I need to understand more about my abilities, Catherine added, looking down at the Moonstone, still glowing faintly in her palm. About what happened here, how I connected with Garrett. Garrett's gaze met hers, something unspoken passing between them. That may require a conversation about bonds, about what it means when an Alpha and Omega form a connection like ours. The implications hung in the air between them, weighty with potential and complication. Catherine wasn't ready to examine them fully, not with so much still unknown, so much at stake. But neither could she deny the reality of what had happened, the power they had unleashed together. One crisis at a time, she said finally, offering a small smile. First, let's get back to the lodge, warn the pack about the Alliance infiltration, and prepare for what comes next. Garrett nodded, respect evident in his expression. He whistled sharply, a signal that brought several wolves rushing into the clearing minutes later. With efficient commands, he organized their return to Silvercrest Lodge, positioning guards to cover their retreat. As they made their way back through the forest, Catherine felt the weight of the moonstone against her skin, a constant reminder of heritage and destiny and choices yet unmade. The scientist in her still struggled with the impossibility of it all, werewolves and ancient entities and mystical connections. But with each step, that resistance weakened. Reality was what existed, what could be observed and experienced, regardless of whether it fit neatly into previous understanding. And the reality was that Catherine Morgan, wildlife biologist and daughter of Elizabeth, had awakened to a world far more complex and dangerous than she had ever imagined. A world where she was not just an observer, but a participant. A world where her choices might determine the fate of an entire hidden society. A world where an alpha with silver-gray fur and eyes like amber flame had risked everything to protect her. As Silvercrest Lodge came into view, lights blazing against the gathering dusk, Catherine made a silent promise. She would find her mother. She would uncover the full truth about her heritage, and she would face whatever came next, not as victim but as victor, embracing both the Omega compassion and Alpha strength that flowed in her veins. The moonstone pulsed in agreement, its ancient power recognizing her resolve, binding her to a destiny that had begun long before her birth, but would be shaped, from this moment forward, by her own choosing. Chaos reigned at Silvercrest Lodge when they returned. Pack members rushed in all directions, carrying weapons, tending to the wounded, reinforcing vulnerable points against the expected Ravenwood incursion. Through it all, Catherine observed with her newly awakened senses the undercurrents of fear and determination flowing through the pack, bonds of loyalty stretched taut by the crisis. Garrett moved through the tumult with quiet authority, his presence alone calming the more frantic members. He dispatched guards to secure the perimeter, organized the wounded in the great hall where Gaia could tend them efficiently, and called his inner circle to gather in a wood-paneled study off the main room. "The Alliance has infiltrated us," he announced without preamble once the heavy oak door closed behind them. "Jason Reed was their agent, likely for years. We must assume our security is compromised, our plans known to the enemy." Shock rippled through the gathered leaders. Marcus, seated in a worn leather chair by the fireplace, looked particularly stricken. "I vouched for Reed," the old man said, pain evident in his voice. "His grandfather fought alongside me in the Pacific Theater. How could I not have seen it?" "The Alliance has perfected their disguises over centuries," Garrett replied, no accusation in his tone. "Their agents replace the real person so thoroughly, few ever detect the difference." "Then how do we know there aren't more among us?" asked a woman Catherine hadn't met, her silver hair contrasting with the youthful strength in her bearing. "The moonstone," Catherine said, drawing all eyes to her. "It revealed Jason's true nature when I used it to call for help." Garrett nodded. Catherine's connection to the stone awakened abilities we haven't seen in generations. Together, we destroyed the Alliance operative. The gathered leaders studied Catherine with new intensity, their assessment ranging from hopeful to skeptical to openly distrustful. "My mother always said to be careful what you wish for," the silver-haired woman remarked dryly. "We've spent decades searching for the moonstone, and now it returns with an untrained Omega carrying dual bloodlines, pursued by both Ravenwood and the Shadow Alliance." Her piercing gaze fixed on Catherine. "You've certainly stirred the hornet's nest, young lady." "Sarah," Garrett said, a warning in his voice. The woman, Sarah, raised a placating hand. "Just stating facts, Alpha. I support the prophecy as much as anyone, but we should acknowledge the storm we're sailing into." "I didn't ask for any of this," Catherine said calmly, meeting Sarah's gaze without flinching. "But I'm here now, and I intend to find my mother and understand my heritage. If that means confronting Ravenwood and this Shadow Alliance, so be it." Sarah's stern expression softened slightly. "Spoken like a true Alpha. Perhaps there is something to this dual bloodline business after all." A commotion outside interrupted the meeting, voices raised in alarm. Garrett moved to the door, tension evident in his posture. Before he reached it, the door burst open, revealing a young pack member, her clothing torn and bloodied. "Alpha!" she gasped, clearly having pushed beyond exhaustion to reach them. "Northern boundary. Breached. They've brought someone. A prisoner." "Who?" Garrett demanded. The messenger's eyes found Catherine. A woman, older. She keeps asking for her daughter. The world seemed to still around Catherine, her heartbeat thundering in her ears. "My mother," she whispered. "They've brought my mother here." "It's a trap," Marcus cautioned, rising from his chair with effort. Stone wouldn't willingly deliver Elizabeth unless he had an agenda. "Trap or not, we can't leave her to them," Catherine said, already moving toward the door. "Where are they holding her?" "The old hunting cabin at Whispering Pines Junction," the messenger replied. "About 2 miles north of here." Garrett turned to his lieutenants. "Secure the lodge. Double the guards around our vulnerable members. No one enters or leaves without my direct order." His gaze moved to Catherine. "We'll take a small team. Approach with caution." Within minutes, they were moving through the forest, Garrett leading with Catherine close behind. 3 pack members Garrett trusted most accompanied them, including Sarah, whose earlier skepticism had given way to grim determination. They traveled in human form for stealth, though Catherine could sense the wolves within them, straining at the leash of their control, ready to emerge at the first sign of danger. The scent of pine and damp earth filled Catherine's heightened senses as they moved deeper into Silvercrest territory. Here, away from the lodge's activity, the forest possessed a primal tranquility that belied the tensions of the day. Shafts of late-afternoon sunlight pierced the canopy, creating dappled patterns on the forest floor. They slowed as they approached a small clearing where an old cabin stood, weathered logs silvered with age. Smoke curled from its stone chimney, and 2 figures stood guard outside, their postures suggesting Ravenwood rather than Alliance operatives. Garrett signaled for them to hold position in the cover of the trees. "I don't like this," he murmured. "Too few guards for a valuable prisoner." "Unless the prisoner isn't the bait," Sarah observed quietly. "But the rescue party." Catherine's hand moved to the moonstone concealed beneath her shirt, feeling its warmth. "I have to know if she's in there," she said. "I can extend my awareness, try to sense her presence." Garrett nodded. "Be careful. If the Alliance has agents nearby, they might detect your probe." Catherine closed her eyes, focusing as Gaia had taught her. She extended her awareness beyond her physical body, seeking the emotional signature that might belong to her mother. The forest around them teemed with life, each creature radiating its own emotional presence, from the contented drowsiness of a nearby fox to the nervous alertness of songbirds. The cabin came into focus in her mind's eye, not as physical structure, but as an emotional landscape. The 2 guards outside radiated bored vigilance, no deception in their presence. Inside, she sensed 3 distinct signatures. One burned with barely contained rage and pain, another with clinical detachment, and the third? Catherine's breath caught. The third presence was weak but unmistakable, a complex tapestry of emotions she recognized from her earliest memories. Love, fear, determination, and beneath it all, a sense of completion, of having found what was long sought. "She's there," Catherine whispered, opening her eyes. "My mother. She's alive but weak. 2 others with her. One I believe is Victor Stone based on the emotional signature." Garrett nodded, impressed by her developing abilities. "Direct approach would be suicide if Stone's inside. We need a diversion." "I'll handle that," Sarah volunteered, a predatory gleam in her eye. "The eastern ridge should provide a suitable vantage point." "Take Miles with you," Garrett instructed one of their companions. "Create enough commotion to draw the guards away, but don't engage directly unless necessary." As Sarah and Miles departed to position themselves, Catherine studied the cabin more carefully with her physical senses. Built decades ago as a hunting retreat, its walls would offer little resistance to werewolf strength. A single window on the side facing them provided a glimpse inside, though curtains obscured a clear view. "When the diversion starts, we move fast," Garrett told Catherine and the remaining pack member, a taciturn man named Dean who carried himself with military precision. "In and out with Elizabeth before reinforcements arrive." Catherine nodded, adrenaline coursing through her system. After 3 years of searching, of questions without answers, her mother was less than 100 yards away. The scientist in her cataloged her physiological responses, the increased heart rate, the sharpened senses, the readiness for action. But beneath the analytical observation lay deeper currents, emotional undertows of hope and fear that threatened to overwhelm her hard-won composure. A howl shattered the forest's quiet, followed by the distinctive sound of a tree crashing down in the distance. The guards' heads snapped toward the commotion, tension evident in their postures. "Go check it out," one ordered the other. "I'll stay with the prisoners." "Stone said no one leaves their post," the second guard objected. "Stone isn't here right now," the first snapped. "And if that's Silvercrest trying to flank us, we need to know." After a moment's hesitation, the second guard loped off toward the disturbance, shifting to wolf form as he disappeared into the trees. The remaining guard paced anxiously, attention divided between the cabin door and the direction of the commotion. "Now," Garrett whispered. They moved with supernatural speed, Dean circling to approach the guard from behind, while Garrett and Catherine made for the cabin's side window. Before the guard could react, Dean had him in a chokehold, dragging him silently into the underbrush where the struggle ended with a muffled crack. Catherine winced at the sound, but kept her focus on the window. Garrett eased it open with practiced care, the old frame giving way with minimal protest. He pulled himself through the opening first, then helped Catherine inside. They found themselves in a small sitting area adjoining a rustic kitchen. A fire burned low in the stone hearth, casting dancing shadows across log walls. Through an open doorway, Catherine could see into the cabin's only other room, where 3 figures were gathered. Victor Stone stood with his back to them, his attention focused on a woman seated in a straight-backed chair. Even from behind, his posture radiated cold authority. Beside him stood a younger woman Catherine didn't recognize, her clinical detachment suggesting a healer or interrogator. And seated in the chair, wrists bound with silver chains that burned angry welts into her skin, was Elizabeth Morgan. Catherine's breath caught. Her mother looked smaller than she remembered, her once blonde hair now streaked with gray, her face lined with years of hardship. Yet the eyes that suddenly met Catherine's across the room were the same, intelligent and fierce, windows to the unbreakable spirit that had raised a daughter alone in a world of secrets. Recognition flashed in Elizabeth's eyes, followed immediately by alarm. Her gaze darted meaningfully toward Victor's back, warning evident in the subtle shake of her head. Too late. Victor stiffened, his enhanced senses detecting the intruders. He turned slowly, a predatory smile spreading across his scarred face as he took in Garrett and Catherine. "Right on schedule," he said with satisfaction, "though I expected you to use the front door." "Release her, Stone," Garrett demanded, his voice carrying the unmistakable command of an alpha. Victor merely raised an eyebrow. "After all the trouble I went to arranging this reunion? I think not." His gaze moved to Catherine, assessing. "So this is Elizabeth's daughter. The rumors don't do you justice, my dear. I see why the Alliance is so interested in you." "You know about the Alliance," Catherine said, watching him carefully. "Of course," Victor replied with a dismissive wave. "I've known about our puppet masters for decades. The difference between me and Blackwood here is that I've made my peace with the arrangement. They provide certain benefits, I provide certain services." "They're using you," Garrett growled, "draining your pack, manipulating you against your own kind." "Using, being used," Victor shrugged. "The world turns on such exchanges. At least I secured a place at the table, rather than being served as the main course." During this exchange, Catherine kept her focus split between Victor and her mother. Elizabeth's expression had changed, resignation giving way to calculation as she worked subtly at her restraints. "You've been working with them all along," Catherine said, keeping Victor's attention on her, "helping them hunt my mother, manipulate the packs." "Not always by choice," Victor admitted, a flash of something like resentment crossing his features. "But one adapts to survive, as your mother well knows." Elizabeth's voice, when she finally spoke, was hoarse from disuse, but carried the same quiet strength Catherine remembered from childhood. "You've adapted so well, you've forgotten what it means to be a true alpha, Victor. To protect rather than persecute. To lead rather than follow." Victor's expression hardened. Spare me your moral superiority, Elizabeth. You ran when things got difficult, left your pack vulnerable, took their power source, all to protect your half-breed daughter. His gaze returned to Catherine. Though I admit, seeing her now, perhaps you weren't entirely misguided. She does possess potential. Enough talk, Garrett interrupted, his patience clearly exhausted. We're taking Elizabeth and leaving. Stand aside or face the consequences. Victor laughed, the sound devoid of humor. You still don't understand the situation, do you, Blackwood? This isn't a rescue mission. It's a trap. And you've played your part perfectly. As if on cue, the cabin door burst open, and 4 Ravenwood enforcers entered, their postures aggressive, eyes gleaming with anticipation. Behind them came a 5th figure, moving with the unnatural grace Catherine now recognized as characteristic of the Alliance. Right on time, Victor said, nodding to the newcomers. Our friends were concerned you might not take the bait. Victor, don't do this, Elizabeth pleaded, genuine fear entering her voice for the first time. You don't understand what they're planning. I understand perfectly, Victor replied coldly. The prophecy, the bloodlines, the moonstone, all converging after decades of careful manipulation. He gestured to the Alliance operative. They've promised Ravenwood will be spared when the culling begins. That's more than I could hope for under the circumstances. The Alliance operative stepped forward, its human disguise that of a middle-aged woman with sharp features and eyes that shifted subtly from brown to violet as it spoke. The moonstone, if you please, it said to Catherine, extending a hand. Surrender it willingly, and your death will be quick. Resist, and... It glanced meaningfully at Elizabeth, the threat clear. Catherine felt the pendant burning against her skin, responding to the danger. Beside her, Garrett had subtly shifted his stance, preparing to protect her even against these impossible odds. His loyalty, his willingness to fight impossible battles on her behalf, stirred something deep within her. You want the moonstone? Catherine said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Then come and take it. With deliberate movements, she withdrew the pendant from beneath her shirt, its blue light immediately filling the cabin with pulsing radiance. The Alliance operative hissed, momentarily shielding its eyes, while the Ravenwood enforcers growled in anticipation. "Catherine, no!" Elizabeth cried, real terror in her voice. "They'll use it to complete the ritual!" But Catherine wasn't surrendering anything. Instead, as the moonstone's light intensified, she reached for the connection she'd formed with Garrett earlier that day, the bond that had allowed them to defeat Jason Reed. She felt his immediate response, his energy aligning with hers, strengthening the stone's power. The Alliance operative sensed what was happening and lunged forward with inhuman speed. "Stop her!" Too late. The moonstone's light expanded in a concussive wave that knocked the Ravenwood enforcers back against the walls. The operative shrieked as the light touched it, its human disguise rippling and distorting like wax near flame. In that moment of confusion, Garrett moved with lethal efficiency, crossing the room to Elizabeth and snapping her silver chains with a single powerful wrench. Catherine focused on maintaining the moonstone's protective glow, holding the Alliance operative at bay, while Dean, who had slipped in through the window behind them, engaged the Ravenwood enforcers. "Get her out of here," Garrett commanded, supporting Elizabeth's weakened form. "Back to the lodge. I'll hold them off." "Not without you," Catherine objected, unwilling to leave him to face such odds alone. The conflict resolved itself in unexpected fashion. As the Alliance operative struggled against the moonstone's power, Victor Stone made a decision that surprised everyone in the room. With a snarl of rage or perhaps release, he shifted to wolf form, a massive silver beast with a scarred face, and launched himself not at Garrett or Catherine, but at the Alliance operative. "Victor, no!" the operative shrieked, its voice distorting as Victor's powerful jaws closed around its throat. The two crashed through the cabin wall in a shower of splintered logs, tumbling down the slope beyond in a violent struggle. The Ravenwood enforcers hesitated, clearly uncertain whether to continue the attack without their alpha's command. Garrett seized the opportunity. "Now!" he ordered, lifting Elizabeth in his arms and making for the shattered wall. Catherine followed, the moonstone still glowing in her grasp, its light forming a protective barrier around them as they escaped into the forest. Dean brought up the rear, ensuring none of the confused enforcers pursued. They ran without stopping, Elizabeth cradled in Garrett's arms like precious cargo until they reached a small stream where Sarah and Miles waited as planned. Sarah took one look at Elizabeth, and her face transformed with recognition and relief. "Beth," she said softly, the nickname suggesting a familiarity Catherine hadn't expected. "After all these years." "Later, Sarah," Garrett interrupted, though not unkindly. "We need to get back to the lodge before Ravenwood regroups." The journey back passed in tense silence, every sense alert for pursuit. Catherine stayed close to Garrett, watching her mother's face with a mixture of joy and concern. Elizabeth drifted in and out of consciousness, occasionally murmuring words too soft to catch, her hand reaching weakly for Catherine whenever she was lucid enough to recognize her daughter's presence. The lodge appeared through the trees as twilight descended, lights blazing from every window, pack members visible on guard at all approaches. Their return caused an immediate stir, with Gaia rushing forward to assess Elizabeth's condition. "Take her to the healing rooms," the Cherokee healer instructed. "She's suffering from silver poisoning and exhaustion, but I can treat both." As Garrett carried Elizabeth inside, Catherine felt a moment of disorientation, the events of the day catching up with her in a rush of delayed reaction. The moonstone still glowed faintly in her hand, responding to her emotional state. "You should rest too," Sarah suggested, noting Catherine's pallor. "Your mother will need you at full strength when she wakes." Catherine shook her head. "I need to be with her. I've waited 3 years for answers." "And a few more hours won't matter," Sarah replied firmly. "Trust Gaia to do what's needed. Elizabeth is stronger than she looks, always has been." Before Catherine could argue further, Garrett returned, his expression grave. "We've secured the lodge, but Ravenwood will regroup once they realize Victor's fate, and the Alliance won't abandon their plans so easily." "What happened back there?" Catherine asked. "Why did Victor turn on the Alliance operative?" "Perhaps he remembered what it truly means to be an alpha," Garrett suggested. "Or perhaps he's simply tired of being a puppet. Either way, his action bought us time we desperately need." "Time for what?" Catherine asked. "For your mother to recover enough to tell us what she knows," Garrett replied. "Elizabeth has been running from the Alliance for 25 years. She must have learned their vulnerabilities, their true intentions." Catherine nodded, understanding the logic but hating the delay nonetheless. "How long until she wakes?" "Gaia estimates a few hours at least," Garrett said. "The silver poisoning was extensive. They've been using it to keep her weakened, prevent her from shifting or accessing her Omega abilities." The thought of her mother suffering such treatment for who knew how long sent a surge of anger through Catherine. The moonstone responded, its glow intensifying briefly before she brought her emotions under control. "You should rest," Garrett told her, echoing Sarah's advice. "You've used abilities today that would exhaust even an experienced Omega." "I need to understand what's happening," Catherine insisted. "The prophecy, the Alliance, why they want the moonstone so badly." She met his gaze directly. "And what happened between us out there in the forest, the connection we formed? That wasn't normal, was it? Even for werewolves." Something flickers in Garrett's eyes, an emotion Catherine couldn't quite identify. "No," he admitted. "It wasn't normal. It suggests compatibility beyond the usual alpha-omega dynamic." He hesitated, then added quietly, "It suggests we might be true mates." The term hung in the air between them, weighted with implications Catherine was only beginning to grasp. In the world of wildlife biology, mate selection followed evolutionary imperatives, optimal genetic combinations for survival. But what Garrett was suggesting seemed to transcend biological determinism, venturing into territory her scientific mind struggled to classify. "What exactly does that mean?" she asked, keeping her voice steady despite the sudden acceleration of her heartbeat. Before Garrett could answer, Marcus appeared in the hallway, his weathered face etched with concern. "Garrett, you need to see this, all of you." They followed the old man to a side room where a large topographic map of the surrounding territories was spread across a table. Red pins marked recent Ravenwood incursions, blue pins showing Silvercrest responses. The pattern was clear, even to Catherine's untrained eye, a systematic testing of boundaries, probing for weaknesses. "This came 10 minutes ago," Marcus said, handing Garrett a folded note bearing a wax seal. "By Raven Messenger, traditional protocol for pack-to-pack communication." Garrett broke the seal and read the contents, his expression darkening. "Ravenwood requests formal parley at the old Conclave grounds, tomorrow at noon." He looked up, meeting Catherine's gaze. "They say Victor Stone is dead, killed by the Shadow Alliance for his betrayal. His daughter, Elena, has claimed alpha status and wishes to discuss terms for peace between our packs." "It's another trap," Sarah said immediately. "The Alliance is using Victor's death to manipulate us into exposing ourselves." "Perhaps," Garrett acknowledged. "But if there's even a chance that Elena Stone truly seeks peace, we must consider it. The old treaties required alpha attendance at formal parleys." "You can't seriously be considering going," Catherine protested. "After what just happened at the cabin?" "An alpha's duty extends beyond personal safety," Garrett replied, his tone gentle but firm. "If there's any chance to end centuries of conflict between our packs, to unite against the true enemy—" "Then we go together," came a hoarse voice from the doorway. They turned to find Elizabeth Morgan standing there, supported by Gaia. She looked pale but determined, her eyes clear despite the evident effort it took to remain upright. "Mom," Catherine breathed, moving to her side instantly. "You should be resting." Elizabeth's hand came up to cup her daughter's cheek, the gesture achingly familiar despite the years of separation. "My beautiful girl," she murmured. "Look at you. So strong, so brave, just as I always knew you would be." Catherine felt tears threatening, emotions she'd kept carefully controlled for years surging to the surface. "I looked for you," she said, her voice catching. "For 3 years." "I know," Elizabeth replied, sorrow in her eyes. "I'm so sorry, Catherine. For everything. For keeping you in the dark, for leaving you alone. But I had no choice." "There's always a choice," Catherine said, unable to keep a hint of accusation from her tone. "Not when the alternative is watching your child die," Elizabeth countered, her gaze moving past Catherine to the map on the table. "The Alliance doesn't just want the Moonstone, Catherine. They want you, have wanted you since before your birth." A chill ran through Catherine at these words. "Because of the prophecy?" Elizabeth nodded wearily. "They've known about it for centuries, worked tirelessly to prevent its fulfillment. When I discovered I was pregnant with you, carrying a child of both Alpha and Omega bloodlines, I knew they would stop at nothing to eliminate the threat you represented." "So you ran," Garrett said, no judgment in his tone. "Took the Moonstone to prevent them from tracking you through pack bonds." "Yes," Elizabeth confirmed. "I hid among humans, used everything I knew about herb lore and ancient rituals to suppress Catherine's werewolf nature, to keep her signature hidden from those who would harm her." Her gaze returned to her daughter, pride mixing with sorrow. "I always knew the day would come when you would awaken to your true self. I just hoped to give you as normal a life as possible before then." "But something changed 3 years ago," Catherine pressed. "You came back to these mountains willingly. Why?" Elizabeth's expression grew haunted. "Because I learned the Alliance's endgame. Not just control of the packs, not just the Moonstone's power, but something far worse." She took a steadying breath. "They're preparing a ritual, one that requires the blood of every major bloodline, the power of the Moonstone, and the sacrifice of a dual-natured being like you. With it, they intend to permanently sever werewolves from our connection to nature, turning us into vessels they can inhabit and control completely." Horror settled over the room as the implications sank in. Not just manipulation or dominance, but complete eradication of what made werewolves themselves. "I came back to warn the packs," Elizabeth continued, "to find allies for the fight I knew was coming. But the Alliance was waiting. They captured me before I could reach Silvercrest." "And held you prisoner all this time," Catherine finished, fresh anger coursing through her. "Yes and no," Elizabeth said, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. "They kept me alive because they needed information only I possessed, about the Moonstone, about you, and because they knew eventually you would come looking for me." "Bait," Garrett said grimly. "As Victor claimed." Elizabeth nodded. "Though I suspect his change of heart at the end was genuine. The Alliance has controlled Victor for decades through a device implanted at the base of his skull. Perhaps in that final moment, he broke free of their influence." "These devices," Catherine said, her scientific mind latching onto the tangible detail. "They're how the Alliance controls werewolves?" "One method among many," Elizabeth confirmed. "But yes, the most direct. They suppress the wolf's natural instincts, override pack bonds, and allow Alliance operatives to exert direct control when needed." Catherine thought of Jason Reed, the way his form had distorted when his true nature was revealed. "And the operatives themselves? What are they, really?" "Ancient parasites," Elizabeth said, her voice dropping to near whisper. "They existed before humans, before werewolves, feeding on spiritual energy, life force. As humanity evolved, they found werewolves particularly potent sources of energy, our connection to nature, and pack bonds creating a feast they couldn't resist." "How do we fight them?" Garrett asked, the practical leader focusing on immediate concerns. "The Moonstone," Elizabeth replied, her gaze moving to the pendant still clutched in Catherine's hand. "It was created centuries ago by the first Alphas and Omegas working in concert, designed specifically to repel the Alliance's influence, but its full power can only be unleashed by a true bonded pair, Alpha and Omega of royal blood." Her gaze moved between Catherine and Garrett, assessing. "You've begun to form such a bond already. I can sense it between you." Catherine felt heat rise to her cheeks. Awareness of Garrett's presence beside her suddenly intensified. The Moonstone pulsed in her hand, responding to her emotional state. "Then we use the Moonstone," Garrett said, his voice steady despite the charged atmosphere. "At this parley tomorrow. If Elena Stone truly seeks alliance against our common enemy, we strengthen both packs. If it's a trap, we spring it on our terms." "It won't be that simple," Elizabeth cautioned. "The Alliance has had centuries to plan, to position their agents throughout both packs, and the Moonstone's power, while considerable, requires proper wielding." Her gaze settled on Catherine. "You need training, preparation, understanding of your dual nature." "We have until noon tomorrow," Catherine said, determination hardening within her. "Teach me what I need to know, both of you." She included Garrett in her glance. "I didn't ask for this heritage, this prophecy, but I won't run from it, not if it means protecting others from what these creatures intend." Pride shone in Elizabeth's eyes, matched by respect in Garrett's. For a moment, the weight of prophecy and danger receded, replaced by something simpler, more fundamental, the connection of three individuals united by purpose despite their different paths to this moment. "Then we begin now," Elizabeth said, straightening despite her evident weakness, "with the truth about who you are, Catherine, the complete truth." As twilight deepened into true night outside, Catherine prepared herself for revelations long withheld, answers to questions that had shaped her entire life. Whatever came tomorrow, whatever dangers the Alliance presented, she would face them with open eyes and full knowledge of her heritage. The Moonstone glowed softly in her palm, a beacon of ancient power and new possibilities, connecting past to future through the uncertain present. Dawn crept over the mountains, spilling golden light across Silvercrest territory as Catherine stood on a secluded plateau behind the lodge. The air carried the crisp bite of early morning, dew sparkling on grass still clinging to the last days of fall. She breathed deeply, filling her lungs with the scent of pine and earth, drawing strength from the land that, she now understood, was as much a part of her heritage as the blood flowing through her veins. Elizabeth had spent most of the night explaining Catherine's dual lineage, the complex history of the werewolf packs in America, and the true nature of the Shadow Alliance. Each revelation had shifted Catherine's understanding of herself, of the world she thought she knew, creating a new foundation upon which she would build whatever came next. "Focus," Gaia instructed from where she sat cross-legged nearby, monitoring Catherine's progress. The balance between alpha strength, and Omega compassion lies in emotional control. Feel both aspects without allowing either to dominate. Catherine closed her eyes, extending her awareness inward as she'd been taught. Within her, two distinct energies circulated, intertwined yet separate. The Omega essence flowed like cool water, receptive and healing, attuned to the emotional currents around her. The Alpha power burned hotter, more assertive, a force that sought expression and action rather than reception and understanding. Finding harmony between these opposing energies proved challenging. When Catherine leaned too far into her Omega side, she became overwhelmed by the emotional signatures radiating from the pack, losing herself in their collective experience. When her Alpha nature ascended, a fierce individualism threatened to sever those connections, replacing empathy with dominance. "Remember," Elizabeth's voice joined Gaia's, her mother's presence a stabilizing influence despite her still weakened condition. "The prophecy speaks of unification, not competition. These aspects of yourself are complementary, not contradictory." Catherine adjusted her approach, visualizing the energies not as opponents, but as partners in a dance, each leading or following as circumstances required. Gradually, the internal conflict eased, replaced by a harmonious flow that felt both natural and new, as though she'd discovered a muscle she'd always possessed but never consciously used. The moonstone, which rested in her palm, responded to this shift, its blue glow intensifying, bathing the plateau in ethereal light. Catherine opened her eyes to find both Gaia and Elizabeth watching her with approval. "Well done," her mother said, a smile warming her worn features. "You're learning in hours what takes most of us years to master." "Necessity is a powerful teacher," Catherine replied. The scientist in her still analyzing each experience, cataloging sensations and reactions, even as she embraced her supernatural heritage. "But understanding the theory doesn't guarantee I'll perform under pressure when we meet Ravenwood." "Which is why we move to the practical application," Garrett announced, approaching from the lodge. He wore simple training clothes, his movements betraying no sign of the previous day's confrontation with Alliance forces. Behind him came Marcus, moving more stiffly, but with determination evident in his weathered face. "Physical transformation," Garrett continued, stopping before Catherine. "The ultimate expression of what we are. You've already experienced partial shifting when you connected with me in the forest, but full transformation requires conscious control rather than instinctual response." Catherine nodded, remembering the strange half-state she'd entered during the confrontation with Jason Reed. Neither fully human nor wolf, but something in between. "Most werewolves spend years learning to control the shift," Elizabeth cautioned. "We're asking you to master it in a single morning." "I don't have years," Catherine replied simply, "and apparently neither does anyone else if the Alliance succeeds in their ritual." Marcus chuckled, approval gleaming in his eyes. "Your father's pragmatism and your mother's determination, a formidable combination." Catherine smiled at the mention of her father, William Timberlake, the alpha of the destroyed Eastwood Pack. Elizabeth had shared everything she knew of him during the night's revelations, painting a portrait of a man who combined Cherokee wisdom with European werewolf strength, whose gentle humor had balanced his warrior spirit. "The first shift is the most challenging," Garrett explained, bringing Catherine's attention back to the present task. "It requires surrendering conscious control while maintaining your core identity, allowing the wolf to emerge without losing your human self in the process." "The balance you just achieved internally will help," Gaia added. "But be prepared for intense physical sensations. Your body will literally reconstruct itself." "That sounds painful," Catherine observed dryly. "It can be," Elizabeth acknowledged, "though less so for those with royal bloodlines. Our bodies are more adaptable, the transition smoother." Garrett moved closer, his presence steady and reassuring. "I'll guide you through it. Our developing bond will help maintain your awareness during the first shift." Catherine nodded, grateful for his support, while still marveling at the rapid evolution of their relationship. In less than 3 days, this man had transformed from stranger to essential ally, their lives intertwining through mystical connections she was only beginning to comprehend. Start by removing your shoes, Gaia instructed practically. First-time shifts often damage clothing. The less you're wearing, the better. Catherine complied, kicking off her boots and socks to feel the cool grass beneath her feet. The direct connection to the earth seemed to strengthen something within her, an ancient recognition between her body and the land that sustained it. "Now close your eyes," Garrett said, his voice dropping to a deeper register that resonated through Catherine's heightened senses. "Feel the wolf within you, not as separate, but as another aspect of yourself, like breathing or dreaming." Catherine followed his guidance, searching inward for the presence she'd glimpsed during moments of stress or connection. It wasn't difficult to find. A consciousness that observed the world through senses more primal than human perception, that organized experience through instincts as ancient as the forest around them. "I feel her," Catherine whispered, surprised by the distinctly feminine presence of her wolf aspect. "She's waiting, watching." "Invite her forward," Elizabeth suggested, "not as a visitor but as a partner, another expression of who you are." Catherine extended her awareness toward this aspect of herself, offering acceptance rather than control. The response was immediate, a surge of wild joy that coursed through her body like electricity. Her skin tingled, muscles tensing as though preparing for movement. "That's it," Garrett encouraged, his voice seeming to come from farther away, though he hadn't moved. "Don't fight the sensations, flow with them." A strange heat spread through Catherine's limbs, bones shifting beneath her skin in ways that should have been agonizing, but instead felt like the release of long-held tension. Her senses sharpened exponentially, the world around her transforming into a tapestry of scents and sounds beyond human perception. The plateau's grass contained not just the scent of vegetation, but the individual signatures of deer that had grazed there hours before, the minute traces of rainfall from 3 days past, the distinctive markers of the pack members who had trained here for generations. The air carried conversations from inside the lodge, the quiet breathing of animals in the surrounding forest, the whisper of wind through pine needles a mile distant. Catherine's body continued its transformation, fur emerging along her limbs, spine elongating, facial structure reconforming into a lupine muzzle. The process accelerated, guided by ancient genetics expressing themselves for the first time. When it completed, Catherine stood on 4 legs, her consciousness expanded rather than diminished by the wolf's perspective. Her fur gleamed golden silver in the morning light, a color Elizabeth had described as characteristic of the Eastwood royal line, with her mother's Silvercrest heritage evident in the darker markings along her back. "Magnificent," Marcus breathed, genuine awe in his voice. A perfect blending of both bloodlines. Catherine turned her head, adjusting to quadrupedal orientation, taking in her companions through new eyes. Their scents told stories their appearances couldn't. Gaia's connection to plant medicines, Elizabeth's lingering illness from silver poisoning, Marcus's age and wisdom, Garrett's controlled strength and protective concern. Garrett smiled, approval evident in his expression. "How does it feel?" Catherine attempted to answer and discovered her vocal apparatus was no longer configured for human speech. Instead, she projected her thoughts through the bond they'd established, finding it stronger now that she'd embraced her wolf nature. "Incredible," she sent, the single word carrying layers of sensation and wonder beyond verbal expression. "Everything is so immediate, raw, real." "The wolf experiences the world without human filtering," Elizabeth explained, moving carefully to Catherine's side, her hand reaching out to touch her daughter's fur with gentle wonder. No preconceptions, no separation between thought and feeling, self and surroundings. Catherine turned in a slow circle, testing her new body, marveling at the natural coordination that came with the form. The wolf's instincts supplied knowledge her human mind lacked, creating a seamless integration between conscious thought and physical capability. "Now try shifting back," Garrett instructed. "The return journey is usually easier, your human form being your primary identity." Catherine focused on her human self, visualizing the transition back to bipedal form. The shift reversed more quickly than the initial transformation, fur receding, limbs restructuring, senses settling back to human parameters, though retaining a heightened quality that hadn't existed before her awakening. Within moments, she stood on two legs again, breathing deeply as her body adjusted to the change. The experience left her exhilarated rather than exhausted, energy coursing through her with renewed vigor. "That was," she began, searching for words adequate to the experience, "like nothing I could have imagined. Science doesn't have vocabulary for what just happened." Elizabeth smiled, pride evident in her expression. "Perfect control on your first shift. Extraordinary, even for someone of your lineage." "The moonstone helped," Catherine acknowledged, feeling the pendant's warmth against her skin where it had somehow remained during her transformation. "It seemed to guide the process, prevent me from losing myself in the shift." "The stone has always been more than a symbol of authority," Marcus confirmed. "It's a focus for our connection to nature, to the spiritual forces that allow our transformations. In the hands of its rightful bearer, its power extends beyond what most of us have witnessed in generations." "Which brings us to the next phase of your training," Garrett said, his expression growing more serious. "Using the moonstone's power purposefully, especially in combat situations." Catherine nodded, understanding the necessity. The morning's peaceful training would mean nothing if she couldn't apply these abilities when facing Alliance forces at the parley. "What do I need to know?" "The moonstone responds primarily to intent," Elizabeth explained, "but intent shaped by emotion, by connection. When you used it against the Alliance operative, you were protecting someone you cared about, someone you'd formed a bond with." Her gaze flickered briefly toward Garrett, a mother's perceptiveness noting what Catherine herself was still coming to terms with. "So its power is limited by my emotional investment," Catherine concluded, the scientist in her analyzing parameters and limitations. "Not limited," Gaia corrected. "Focused, directed. The stone's raw power is considerable, but without emotional guidance, it would be like trying to perform surgery with a flamethrower." "Which is why the Alliance has never been able to use it effectively, despite numerous attempts to steal it over the centuries," Marcus added. "They lack the capacity for the bonds that focus its energy." Catherine considered this information, integrating it with what she'd already experienced. "And when Garrett and I connected our energies—" "You created a circuit," Elizabeth confirmed. "Alpha and Omega, action and reception, strength and compassion. The perfect balance the stone was designed to amplify." Garrett stepped closer, his presence solid and reassuring beside Catherine. "We'll need that connection today at the parley. If Elena Stone is genuine in seeking alliance against the shadow forces, the moonstone can verify her intentions. If it's a trap, then we'll need its protection," Catherine finished, "and its offensive capabilities." "Precisely," Garrett agreed, "which is why we need to practice intentional use before we face whatever awaits us at noon." For the next several hours, Catherine worked with both Garrett and Elizabeth, learning to channel the moonstone's energy with increasing precision. She discovered that different intentions produced different manifestations. Protection created shields of blue light. Healing generated a gentler radiance that accelerated natural recovery. Offensive applications projected focused beams that disrupted Alliance energies without harming true werewolves. Throughout these exercises, Catherine's connection with Garrett strengthened, their energies aligning with growing harmony. She found herself increasingly aware of him, not just physically but spiritually, sensing his emotions, anticipating his movements, their actions becoming coordinated without verbal communication. "The true mate bond is developing rapidly," Elizabeth observed during a brief rest period, her tone mixing maternal concern with practical assessment. "Faster than I've ever witnessed." "Is that dangerous?" Catherine asked, accepting a canteen of water from Gaia with gratitude. "Not dangerous, exactly," her mother replied carefully, "but intense. Such bonds usually form over months or years, allowing both parties to adjust gradually. The accelerated timeline means you'll need to establish boundaries consciously rather than letting them develop naturally." Catherine glanced toward Garrett, who stood conferring with Marcus about the upcoming parley. Even at this distance, she could sense his awareness of her, a constant current between them that neither could fully ignore. "We haven't had much choice in the timeline," she said, returning her attention to Elizabeth. "Everything since my accident has been compressed into days." "I know." Elizabeth's expression softened with sympathy. "And you've handled it with remarkable adaptability. Just be careful with your heart, Catherine. Biological imperatives and mystical connections notwithstanding, you still have choices in how this relationship develops." Before Catherine could respond, Sarah appeared at the edge of the plateau, her expression urgent. "Scouts report movement along the eastern approach. Ravenwood forces heading toward the conclave grounds earlier than expected." Garrett rejoined them immediately, his posture shifting to alpha readiness. "Numbers?" "At least 30 wolves, possibly more following," Sarah reported. "And something else. They're carrying devices our scouts didn't recognize, metal constructs with violet energy signatures." "Alliance technology," Elizabeth said grimly, pushing herself to her feet despite her lingering weakness. "Designed to disrupt pack bonds, weaken our collective strength." "Then we move now," Garrett decided, scanning their group. "Catherine, Elizabeth, Marcus with me. Sarah, coordinate with Dean to position our forces strategically around the conclave grounds. Gaia, prepare the healing chambers. We may have casualties before the day is done." As the group dispersed to their assigned tasks, Catherine felt a curious calm settle over her, the scientist's objective assessment merging with the werewolf's instinctive readiness. Whatever came next, she was as prepared as circumstances allowed, equipped with knowledge and abilities unimaginable just days ago. Garrett approached her, his expression serious, but eyes warm with something that transcended the crisis around them. "Ready?" Catherine nodded, touching the moonstone at her throat, feeling its responsive warmth. "As I'll ever be." "Stay close to me," he said, his voice dropping to a register only she could hear. "Not because you need protection, but because together we're stronger than either of us alone." The simple truth of his statement resonated through their developing bond. Catherine smiled, finding unexpected comfort in this partnership that destiny or biology or simple human connection had created between them. "Together, then," she agreed. "Let's go meet our neighbors." The journey to the conclave grounds took them through the heart of Silvercrest territory, following ancient paths worn into the forest floor by generations of werewolves. Elizabeth traveled in human form, still too weakened by silver poisoning to attempt transformation, supported by Marcus, whose age belied his enduring strength. Garrett and Catherine flanked them, senses alert for any sign of ambush or deception. Catherine used the journey to continue practicing her newly developed abilities, extending her awareness through pack bonds to locate Silvercrest sentries positioned throughout the surrounding forest. She found she could perceive their emotional states, their positions, even glimpses of what they observed, creating a composite map of the territory more detailed than any physical representation. "You're adapting to your abilities with remarkable speed," Elizabeth observed, noting Catherine's distant expression. "It took me years to develop that level of pack awareness." "Necessity," Catherine replied, refocusing on their immediate surroundings. "And perhaps the dual bloodline creates capabilities beyond what either Alpha or Omega would possess individually." "The balance predicted in the prophecy," Marcus mused. "Not just symbolic, but functional, enhancing natural abilities through complementary energies." Garrett, who had been scanning the path ahead, paused suddenly, his posture shifting to alert wariness. "We're approaching the boundary. Ravenwood scent markers are fresh." Catherine extended her senses, detecting the unfamiliar signatures Marcus had taught her to recognize as characteristic of the Eastern Pack. But beneath those identifiers lay something else, a subtle wrongness that raised hackles she didn't physically possess in human form. "Alliance influence," she murmured, the moonstone warming against her skin in warning. "Not operatives directly, but their technology, their energy." Garrett nodded, confirming her assessment. "Remember the plan. We approach openly, assess Elena Stone's intentions, and reveal nothing of our full capabilities until necessary. The conclave grounds came into view as they crested a gentle rise, an ancient clearing ringed by massive stones resembling a smaller version of Stonehenge. At its center stood a raised dais of natural rock, worn smooth by centuries of use. According to Marcus, this sacred space had hosted pack gatherings since before European settlement, its location marked by natural ley lines that strengthened werewolf abilities and hindered alliance interference. Today, however, the Alliance's presence was unmistakable. Catherine could see the devices Sarah had described, metallic constructs resembling small obelisks positioned at intervals around the clearing's perimeter. Each emitted a subtle violet glow, visible only to enhanced werewolf perception, creating a containment field that disrupted the natural energies of the place. On the far side of the clearing stood the Ravenwood contingent, perhaps 20 wolves in human form arranged in formal configuration around a central figure. Elena Stone resembled her father in coloring, the same striking silver-white hair and athletic build, but where Victor's features had been hardened by cruelty and compromise, his daughter's face showed sharper intelligence and wary calculation. "Smaller group than reported," Garrett observed quietly. "The others must be positioned in the surrounding forest." "A precaution we've also taken," Marcus replied. "The question is whether their hidden forces are for protection or ambush." They continued forward, stepping into the clearing with deliberate visibility, making no attempt to conceal their approach. Catherine felt dozens of eyes tracking their movement, assessing, evaluating the small Silvercrest delegation with particular attention focused on her. Elena Stone stepped forward from her group, alone, meeting them at the ancient dais that had traditionally served as neutral ground for pack negotiations. Protocol required that alphas approach unaccompanied, but Garrett made no move to separate from their group. "Blackwood," Elena acknowledged, her voice carrying easily across the intervening space. "I see you disregard tradition by bringing companions to an alpha parley. And you disregard sanctuary laws by bringing Alliance technology into conclave grounds," Garrett countered evenly. "Traditions evolve when circumstances demand, Stone." A flicker of something, surprise perhaps, or grudging respect, crossed Elena's features. "Direct as always." "Very well." Her gaze shifted to Catherine, assessing with uncomfortable intensity. "This must be the Omega who's caused such commotion. The daughter Elizabeth managed to hide all these years." "Catherine Morgan," Garrett confirmed, a subtle emphasis on the human surname that revealed nothing of her dual heritage. "And yes, Elizabeth has returned to her pack as well." Elena's attention moved to Elizabeth, recognition and something more complex crossing her features. "The prodigal Omega. My father spoke of you often, though rarely with kindness." "Victor and I had our differences," Elizabeth replied diplomatically, "but I never wished him harm. His decision to turn against the Alliance in his final moments suggests he reclaimed something of his true self at the end." Elena's composure faltered momentarily, genuine emotion breaking through her controlled exterior. "Is that what happened? The Alliance operatives claimed he was killed by Silvercrest forces during an unauthorized incursion." "A lie," Catherine said, speaking for the first time. "Your father died protecting us from an Alliance operative who had infiltrated your pack. He turned on them, not us." "Not?" Elena studied Catherine's face, searching for deception. Finding none, her expression hardened with renewed resolve. "Then it seems we have mutual grievances against these parasites." She straightened, addressing Garrett directly. "Which brings us to the purpose of this parley. The Alliance has controlled Ravenwood for generations, using technology and threats to ensure compliance. With my father's death, I see an opportunity to break that control, restore our pack's independence." "A noble sentiment," Garrett acknowledged cautiously. "But words come easily. What guarantees do you offer of your sincerity?" Elena reached into her jacket, withdrawing a small metallic object that pulsed with the same violet energy as the perimeter devices. "This is a control module recovered from my father's body after his death. It was implanted at the base of his skull, allowing the Alliance to override his will when he strayed from their agenda. Examination revealed similar devices in over 30% of our pack members, particularly those in positions of authority. She held the device toward them, offering it for inspection. "I've begun removing these implants from my pack, but the process is dangerous without proper understanding of the technology. I propose an alliance, Blackwood. Ravenwood's strength combined with Silvercrest's knowledge to eliminate the shadow influence from both our territories." The offer hung in the air between them, outwardly reasonable, yet surrounded by centuries of distrust and conflict. Catherine extended her senses through the Moonstone, seeking deception in Elena's emotional signature. She detected genuine anger toward the alliance, determination, fear for her pack's survival. But beneath these legitimate concerns lay something else, a calculation that suggested not everything was being revealed. "Your offer has merit," Garrett replied carefully. "But incomplete information makes for unstable alliances. What aren't you telling us, Elena?" The Ravenwood Alpha's expression tightened. "Perceptive. Very well. The Alliance has given our pack an ultimatum. Deliver the Moonstone and the dual-blood Omega to them within 3 days, or they activate kill switches in all implanted pack members, essentially executing a third of Ravenwood instantly." Shock rippled through the Silvercrest group at this revelation. Catherine felt Elizabeth's horror, Marcus's outrage, and Garrett's cold fury as distinctly as her own emotional response. "So this parley is what, exactly?" Garrett demanded. "A negotiation for Catherine and the Moonstone as ransom for your pack?" "No," Elena said firmly. "It's an opportunity for honest communication about our mutual enemy. I have no intention of delivering anyone to the Alliance, but neither will I watch my pack members die without exploring every possible alternative." Catherine stepped forward, the scientist in her analyzing the problem from multiple angles. "The control devices, they're technological rather than supernatural, correct?" Elena nodded, surprised by the shift in conversation. "Yes, advanced beyond human development, but fundamentally technology." "Then they have vulnerabilities," Catherine continued. "Power sources, transmission frequencies, operational parameters. If I could examine the module you've recovered—" Understanding dawned in Elena's eyes. "You think you could neutralize them? Prevent remote activation?" "Possibly," Catherine replied. "My background is biology, not engineering, but I understand enough about wireless transmission to formulate hypotheses." Elena considered this possibility, weighing it against other options. "The Alliance will know of our meeting. They monitor Ravenwood constantly through the implants still active in my pack. Whatever plan we develop must account for their surveillance." "Then we give them exactly what they expect to see," Elizabeth suggested, her strategic mind engaging despite her physical weakness. "A conflict between our packs, an apparent rejection of alliance that conceals our true cooperation." Garrett nodded slowly, seeing the potential in this approach. A staged confrontation, public enmity, hiding private collaboration. "It could work," Elena agreed, calculation replacing wariness in her expression. "My pack returns to Ravenwood territory appearing angry, unsuccessful in negotiations. Meanwhile, we establish secret communication channels, share information about the control devices." As they discussed the details of this strategy, Catherine's attention was drawn to the perimeter devices surrounding the clearing. The violet energy they emitted had intensified during the conversation, suggesting increased activity beyond their passive monitoring function. The Moonstone pulsed against her skin, warning of approaching danger. Through her enhanced awareness, Catherine detected movement in the forest beyond the clearing, figures approaching with the unnatural synchronization characteristic of Alliance control. "Garrett," she said quietly, interrupting the tactical discussion, "we're being surrounded." His head snapped up, senses immediately extending to verify her warning. "How many?" "At least 40 signatures approaching from multiple directions," Catherine replied, the Moonstone's sensitivity enhancing her perception. "And they're not just Ravenwood wolves. There's something else, something wrong about their energy patterns." Elena cursed softly, genuine alarm replacing calculation. "They're activating sleeper agents. Werewolves implanted with advanced control modules that completely override consciousness." She turned to her visible contingent, issuing rapid commands. "Defensive formation, priority protection for unimplanted members." "The Alliance isn't waiting for your deadline," Elizabeth observed grimly. "They're eliminating the potential for alliance between our packs now, before we can organize effective resistance." Garrett's posture shifted to combat readiness, his voice carrying the unmistakable command of an alpha. "Sarah," he called, knowing the lieutenant could hear through pack bonds. "Execute Protocol Obsidian. All forces to the Conclave grounds immediately." Catherine felt the moonstone's heat intensifying against her skin, responding to the imminent threat. The training of the morning seemed suddenly theoretical, academic compared to the reality of combat about to engulf them. Elena moved closer, temporary allies against a greater threat. "If we survive this, Blackwood, I believe we have the foundation for a genuine alliance." Garrett's grim smile held no humor, only warrior's acknowledgement. "Let's ensure we're alive to sign the treaties then." Around the clearing, the perimeter devices flared with violet energy, creating a dome-like containment field that sealed the Conclave grounds from outside assistance. At the same moment, the forest erupted with motion as dozens of controlled werewolves emerged, their movements unnaturally synchronized, eyes glowing with the same violet light as the Alliance technology. Catherine took position beside Garrett, the moonstone warming in her grasp as she prepared to face creatures that were neither fully enemy nor innocent, victims and weapons simultaneously in the Shadow Alliance's ancient war against werewolf independence. "Together," Garrett reminded her, the word carrying layers of meaning beyond its simple syllables. Catherine nodded, drawing on every lesson, every revelation, every moment of connection since her awakening in this new reality. "Together," she agreed, as the first wave of controlled attackers breached the clearing's edge. The battle for Silvercrest, for Ravenwood, for the future of werewolf autonomy had begun in earnest. The controlled werewolves surged into the clearing like a single organism, their movements unnaturally synchronized, eyes blazing violet with Alliance control. They were a grotesque parody of pack coordination, individual will subjugated to external dominance rather than harmoniously aligned through natural bonds. Catherine recognized with horror that many wore the remnants of Ravenwood clothing, members of Elena's pack forcibly activated against their alpha's command. Others appeared to be ordinary humans from surrounding communities, sleeper agents implanted years or decades ago, waiting for this moment of crisis. "Don't kill them if possible!" Elena shouted as her uncompromised pack members formed a defensive perimeter. "They're victims, not enemies!" Garrett nodded grimly, issuing similar instructions to the Silvercrest forces now emerging from the forest to counter the Alliance assault. "Disable, restrain, but preserve life where possible. Target the control devices at the base of the skull." Catherine felt the moonstone pulse against her skin, responding to her emotional state and the chaos erupting around them. The training exercises of the morning seemed theoretical compared to the brutal reality of combat now engulfing the Conclave grounds. Yet muscle memory and instinct guided her movements as she positioned herself beside Garrett, forming the center of the defense. "The perimeter devices," she said urgently, indicating the obelisk-like constructs surrounding the clearing. "They're amplifying the control signals. If we can disable them, we break their coordination," Garrett finished, understanding immediately. "Elena, can your forces target the eastern devices?" The Ravenwood Alpha nodded sharply, already directing her fighters with quick hand signals. "We'll take half the perimeter. Your pack handles the rest?" "Done," Garrett confirmed, their centuries-old rivalry temporarily set aside in the face of mutual annihilation. The first wave of controlled attackers reached them, moving with unnatural speed and strength beyond normal werewolf capabilities. Catherine had seconds to observe how the Alliance augmented their puppets, pushing bodies beyond sustainable limits with no regard for the damage inflicted. A controlled woman lunged at Catherine with inhuman velocity, fingers contorted into claw-like appendages despite remaining in human form. Catherine sidestepped instinctively, using the attacker's momentum to redirect her into the stone dais. "Catherine!" Elizabeth called, tossing a small object that glinted in the midday sun. Catherine caught it reflexively, recognizing one of Gaia's silver blades, designed not to kill, but to temporarily incapacitate werewolves by disrupting their accelerated healing. The weight felt unfamiliar in her hand, her scientific background having prepared her for laboratories, not battlefields. Yet something deeper than conscious thought guided her movements as 3 more controlled attackers converged on her position. The moonstone flared brilliantly, its energy flowing through Catherine's body, enhancing her reflexes and strength beyond normal Omega capabilities. She moved with fluid precision, ducking beneath a wild swing, the silver blade flashing as she targeted not flesh, but the almost invisible protrusion at the base of an attacker's skull. The blade connected, severing the control device's connection to the host's nervous system. The controlled werewolf collapsed instantly, body convulsing as autonomy returned in a violent rush. Catherine had no time to verify his condition as the remaining attackers pressed forward, their movements adjusting with algorithmic efficiency to counter her tactics. Across the clearing, Garrett fought with the disciplined ferocity characteristic of an alpha defending his territory. He had shifted to a partial transformation, claws and enhanced strength without full wolf form, maintaining the dexterity needed for precision strikes against control devices. Through their strengthening bond, Catherine sensed his strategy, his movements, allowing her to coordinate her actions with his without verbal communication. They became a synchronized unit, covering each other's vulnerabilities, amplifying strengths, the moonstone's energy flowing between them in pulsing waves. "The northwest perimeter device is down," Sarah called from the edge of the clearing, where she stood over a shattered obelisk, violet energy dissipating into the air. Catherine felt the change immediately, a weakening in the control field, the coordinated movements of the Alliance puppets becoming slightly less precise. "It's working!" she shouted to Garrett. "Target the remaining devices!" Elizabeth and Marcus had taken defensive positions near the central dais, protecting each other despite their physical limitations. Elizabeth's Omega abilities allowed her to temporarily disrupt the control signals affecting nearby attackers, creating moments of confusion that Marcus exploited with well-placed strikes from his walking staff, targeting the implanted devices with surgical precision. Catherine fought her way toward the nearest perimeter device, the moonstone's light forming a protective aura around her that repelled direct contact from controlled attackers. She reached the obelisk, studying its construction with analytical detachment despite the chaos surrounding her. The device's architecture suggested both technological and biological components, a hybrid system characteristic of Alliance engineering. Its surface pulsed with rhythmic patterns, code or language Catherine couldn't decipher but instinctively recognized as malevolent. "How do I disable it?" she asked aloud, not expecting an answer. The moonstone responded to her question, its energy shifting from protective to investigative. Knowledge flowed into Catherine's awareness, not as words, but as direct understanding, the stone's ancient memory providing insights into Alliance weaknesses. Without conscious decision, Catherine pressed her palm against the obelisk's surface, channeling the moonstone's energy directly into its core. The device vibrated, its violet glow intensifying momentarily before collapsing inward, imploding with a concussive force that knocked nearby combatants off their feet. The moonstone, Catherine realized, understanding blossoming in her mind. It's not just a weapon or shield, it's a key to their systems, a countermeasure designed specifically against Alliance technology. She relayed this discovery to Garrett through their bond, felt his immediate comprehension and tactical adjustment. He fought his way to her side, efficiently disabling 3 controlled attackers with precise strikes to their implants. "Can you replicate that effect?" he asked, positioning himself protectively as she recovered her balance. "I think so," Catherine confirmed, the scientist in her analyzing variables even as her newly awakened instincts processed the moonstone's guidance. "But I need to reach the remaining devices." "Then that's our priority," Garrett decided, calling to Elena, who fought nearby. "Stone, focus your forces on creating a path to the perimeter devices. Catherine can neutralize them directly." Elena nodded sharply, immediately redirecting her fighters to form corridors through the melee, targeting controlled attackers that blocked access to the remaining obelisks. The temporary alliance between Silvercrest and Ravenwood functioned with surprising efficiency, centuries of rivalry set aside in the face of extinction. Catherine moved with purpose toward the next device, Garrett close beside her, their movements synchronized through their strengthening bond. The moonstone's glow intensified with each step, as if eager to engage its ancient enemy. Reaching the second obelisk, Catherine repeated the process, pressing her palm to its surface and channeling the moonstone's energy into its core. The device resisted more strongly than the first, its countermeasures activating to repel her interference. Pain lanced through Catherine's arm, Alliance energy attempting to corrupt the moonstone's influence, to turn its power back against her. She gasped, nearly pulling away as the sensation intensified. Garrett's hand covered hers immediately, his alpha energy joining with her omega essence, creating the balanced circuit Elizabeth had described during training. The moonstone responded to their combined intent, its blue radiance overwhelming the device's violet resistance. The obelisk imploded like its predecessor, taking with it another section of the control field. Throughout the clearing, controlled attackers faltered, their movements becoming less synchronized, individual will beginning to reassert against Alliance domination. "It's working," Elizabeth called from the central dais, where she and Marcus had established a makeshift treatment area for freed werewolves. "The control is weakening." Catherine and Garrett continued their methodical progress around the perimeter, deactivating each device with their combined energy. With each obelisk's destruction, the Alliance's hold over the controlled werewolves diminished, their attacks becoming increasingly disorganized and ineffective. Elena and her uncompromised forces systematically disabled the implants of freed pack members, using the confusion to their advantage. Sarah led similar efforts among the Silvercrest defenders, creating an expanding circle of recovered werewolves who joined the effort to liberate their brethren. As they approached the final perimeter device, Catherine sensed a shift in the energy patterns surrounding the clearing. Something new approached, something far more powerful than the controlled werewolves they'd faced thus far. "Garrett," she warned, the moonstone pulsing urgently against her skin. "Something's coming." He nodded, having sensed it too through his alpha awareness. Alliance operative. Not a puppet, but one of the parasites themselves. The forest parted at the eastern edge of the clearing, trees bending unnaturally away from the figure that emerged. Unlike the disguised operative that had possessed Jason Reed, this entity made little attempt to maintain human appearance. Its form shifted constantly, features flowing like wax near flame, only the glowing violet eyes remaining constant amid the metamorphosis. "Clever, clever wolves," it said, its voice modulating between tones and timbres as if multiple voices spoke in imperfect unison, "playing with forces beyond your comprehension." The remaining controlled werewolves immediately oriented toward the newcomer, their movements becoming more coordinated again despite the destroyed perimeter devices. Catherine realized the operative itself served as a control nexus, its presence amplifying the remaining signals. "Dr. Helena Shaw," Elena identified, recognition and hatred mingling in her voice. "Or whatever inhabits her body now." The operative laughed, the sound distorting unnaturally. "This shell served its purpose. A brilliant mind, your Dr. Shaw. She created most of the technology you're so eager to destroy, believing she was advancing werewolf evolution." The flowing features settled momentarily into a semblance of a middle-aged woman with sharp features, before dissolving again into amorphous flux. "What do you want?" Garrett demanded, positioning himself protectively before Catherine, though she could sense through their bond that he recognized the futility of conventional defense against such a creature. "What we have always wanted," the operative replied. "Your energy, your essence, your connection to natural forces our kind lost millennia ago." Its gaze fixed on Catherine, or more specifically, on the moonstone at her throat. "And the key to unlimited access, which that naive girl has so conveniently activated after centuries of dormancy." Catherine felt the moonstone respond to the operative's attention, not with submission, but with something approaching recognition and defiance, ancient enemies acknowledging each other across an evolutionary gulf. "You've failed," Catherine stated with calm certainty that surprised even herself. "Whatever ritual you planned, whatever culmination of centuries of manipulation you envisioned, it won't happen." Such confidence, the operative mocked, its form continuing to shift and flow. Based on what? A few destroyed monitoring devices? A temporary alliance between packs that have hated each other for generations? Or perhaps the fledgling bond between Alpha and Omega that you believe fulfills some primitive prophecy? As it spoke, the operative moved closer, its presence causing the air to thicken with ozone and the metallic tang of unnatural energies. The controlled werewolves formed a protective perimeter around it, their movements regaining the unnatural synchronization that had weakened with the destroyed obelisks. "The prophecy speaks truth," Elizabeth stated, moving forward despite her weakness to stand beside Catherine. "When moon and blood combine in one, when Alpha strength and Omega heart unite, the shadow's reign shall be undone." The operative hissed at her words, genuine anger replacing mockery. "Rhymes and riddles from primitive minds. We have existed since before your species learned to make fire, woman. We will exist long after the last wolf howls its death into an empty sky." Catherine felt something shift within the moonstone as the operative's anger manifested, a resonance between ancient enemies that transcended contemporary conflict. Understanding blossomed in her mind, connections forming between disparate pieces of knowledge she'd acquired since her awakening. "You fear it," she realized aloud. "Not just the prophecy, but the moonstone itself, because you recognize it." The operative's constant morphing stilled momentarily, confirmation in its arrested movement. "The stone wasn't created by werewolves," Catherine continued, scientific deduction merging with mystical insight provided by the moonstone itself. "It was part of you once, wasn't it? A fragment of your original form, transformed by contact with our world, with nature's harmony." "Clever girl," the operative acknowledged, its voice dropping to a sibilant whisper, "too clever to leave alive." It moved with terrifying speed, crossing the intervening space faster than human perception could follow, but Catherine had transcended merely human senses days ago. The moonstone flared brilliantly as the operative approached, its light forming a barrier that momentarily checked the creature's advance. Garrett shifted instantly to full wolf form, a massive silver-gray predator, interposing himself between Catherine and the Alliance operative. Around the clearing, both Silvercrest and Ravenwood fighters moved to support them, creating concentric rings of defense. "You cannot stop what has been in motion for centuries," the operative snarled, its form elongating, limbs stretching into impossible configurations as it prepared to attack again. "The ritual approaches completion even now. The devices implanted throughout your territories, your communities, they aren't just control mechanisms. They're harvesters, collectors of essence, preparing for the final convergence." "Then we destroy them," Elena stated flatly, moving to stand beside Garrett, her own transformation rippling across her features as she prepared to shift. "All of them, starting with you." The operative laughed, the sound distorting through multiple vocal registers simultaneously. "You would need to destroy thousands of devices hidden throughout your world, little Alpha. And you would need to do it before the lunar eclipse tonight, when the convergence reaches its apex." Catherine felt a chill at these words, remembering Elizabeth's warnings about the Alliance's ultimate goal, not just control, but complete absorption of werewolf essence. The moonstone pulsed against her skin, urging action rather than conversation. "Garrett," she said softly, not taking her eyes from the operative. "I need to reach the final perimeter device. The moonstone shows me something, a possibility." He acknowledged through their bond, understanding flowing between them without words. With a silent signal, he coordinated with Elena, their packs moving in concert to create a diversion, drawing the operative's attention away from Catherine. As the werewolves engaged the Alliance creature, Catherine slipped sideways toward the final obelisk, its violet glow pulsing in accelerating rhythm as if sensing her approach. The controlled werewolves moved to intercept her, but Silvercrest defenders intercepted them, creating a corridor through which she ran with preternatural speed. Behind her, the sounds of combat intensified, the operative's inhuman shrieks mingling with the growls and howls of transformed werewolves. Catherine forced herself not to look back, trusting Garrett and the others to hold the creature at bay long enough for her to complete what the moonstone was guiding her to do. Reaching the final device, Catherine placed her palm against its surface as before, channeling the Moonstone's energy into its core. But this time, instead of simply destroying it, she followed the stone's guidance to reconfigure the device's transmission parameters, converting it from control mechanism to broadcasting tower. The obelisk's violet glow shifted, blue energy from the Moonstone infiltrating its systems, rewriting its fundamental purpose. Catherine felt the change through her palm, the corruption of Alliance technology into something new, something that could serve rather than subjugate. "What are you doing?" Elena called, noticing the device's changed appearance as she fought nearby. "Turning their network against them," Catherine replied, the scientist in her marveling at the elegant solution the Moonstone had provided. "These devices form a communications grid across both territories. If we can reconfigure rather than destroy them, we can broadcast a disruption signal to all implants simultaneously," Elena finished, understanding immediately, breaking their control everywhere at once. The operative sensed what was happening, its attention snapping toward Catherine with terrifying intensity. "Stop her! It commanded the remaining controlled werewolves, its form distorting further as it attempted to reach her directly. Garrett intercepted it in full wolf form, his massive body slamming into the creature with bone-jarring force. The operative shrieked in pain and rage, its limbs elongating into blade-like appendages that slashed at Garrett's flank, drawing blood that steamed in the afternoon air. Catherine felt Garrett's pain through their bond, but couldn't afford distraction. The reconfigured device was beginning to pulse with blue-white energy, establishing connections with other obelisks throughout the territories, the Moonstone's influence spreading through the Alliance network like a benevolent virus. "Elizabeth!" Catherine called, recognizing she needed her mother's Omega abilities to complete the process. "I need your help!" Elizabeth fought her way to Catherine's side, her face pale with exhaustion, but determination burning in her eyes. "What do you need?" "Your connection to the pack bonds," Catherine explained quickly, the Moonstone growing warmer in her grasp. "I need to channel the Moonstone's energy through both Silvercrest and Ravenwood bonds simultaneously. You're connected to one, I'm developing connection to the other, but we need to bridge them completely." Elizabeth nodded, understanding immediately. A unified pack bond, something not seen in generations. She placed her hand over Catherine's on the transformed obelisk, their shared Omega essence creating a resonance that strengthened the Moonstone's broadcast. Through this connection, Catherine felt Elizabeth's lifetime of experience flowing into her awareness, generations of Omega knowledge condensed into moments of pure understanding. "Now we need the Alphas," Elizabeth said, her gaze moving to where Garrett and Elena fought side by side against the operative, their ancient rivalry forgotten in the face of extinction. Through her strengthening bond with Garrett, Catherine projected their need, felt his immediate comprehension and response. With a powerful lunge, he disengaged from the operative, racing toward them with Elena close behind, both understanding instinctively what was required. The Alliance creature shrieked in fury, recognizing their intent. It moved to intercept, its form blurring with impossible speed. But the werewolves it had controlled were breaking free as the reconfigured obelisk's signals spread, creating chaos that slowed the operative's progress. Garrett reached Catherine's side first, shifting smoothly back to human form, his hand covering hers and Elizabeth's on the device's surface. Elena joined them seconds later, completing the circuit that connected both packs through their respective alphas and omegas. The Moonstone flared with blinding intensity, its light engulfing the four of them before expanding outward in concentric waves. Catherine felt its energy flowing through the complex web of pack bonds, natural connections amplified and purified by the stone's ancient power. Where the light touched controlled werewolves, the Alliance implants sputtered and failed, violet energy dissipating as natural consciousness returned. The expanding wave didn't stop at the clearing's edge, but continued outward, following the network of devices the Alliance had established throughout both territories, converting each into a relay that spread the Moonstone's liberating influence. The operative reached them as the wave expanded, its features contorted with fury and fear. "You cannot stop what we have begun," it howled, lashing out with appendages that morphed between solid and gaseous states. But the moonstone's light intercepted its attack, blue-white energy meeting violet darkness in a clash of opposing forces that shook the ancient stones surrounding the clearing. Catherine felt the operative's essence through this contact, its alien consciousness briefly touching her own, revealing its true nature and purpose. Not merely parasite, but exile. Not simply predator, but refugee. The Alliance entities had fled their own dying reality eons ago, seeking new energy sources to replace what they had consumed in their native dimension. Werewolves, with their connection to natural forces and spiritual energies, provided the richest harvest they had discovered in millennia of searching. This understanding flowed through Catherine into the combined pack bond, spreading to every werewolf connected to the expanding network. With comprehension came not hatred, but determination, not vengeance, but protection, the natural response of guardians rather than victims. The operative sensed this shift, felt its advantage evaporating as fear transformed into coordinated resistance. It attempted to withdraw, to abandon its physical manifestation, and escape through dimensional rifts it had used for centuries. "No," Catherine said, the word carrying the combined authority of dual bloodlines, moonstone power, and pack consensus. "You've taken enough from us. No more." Through their joined hands, the 4 pack leaders channeled the moonstone's energy directly at the operative, blue-white light, coalescing into a focused beam that penetrated the creature's shifting form. It screamed in multiple voices simultaneously, its body destabilizing as the moonstone's power disrupted the interdimensional energies that composed its being. "This isn't the end," it hissed, its form collapsing inward, compressing toward a singularity. "We are legion across realities. Others will come." "And we'll be waiting," Garrett replied, his voice carrying the weight of Alpha Command. "United, prepared, and aware. Your advantage was always our ignorance, our division. That ends today." With a final shriek of defiance, the operative imploded, its physical manifestation collapsing into a sphere of violet energy that pulsed once before dissipating into the air, leaving nothing but a faint ozone scent to mark its passing. Silence fell over the conclave grounds as werewolves from both packs processed what had occurred. The controlled attackers lay unconscious or disoriented around the clearing, Alliance implants neutralized by the moonstone's energy wave, their minds beginning the difficult process of reintegration. Catherine felt the enormity of what they'd accomplished washing over her, scientific detachment giving way to emotional recognition. Through the still active pack bonds, she sensed similar reactions throughout both Silvercrest and Ravenwood territories, as werewolves everywhere regained autonomy, control devices deactivated by the expanding wave of moonstone energy. "It worked," Elena said, breaking the silence, wonder and cautious optimism in her voice. "The control network is down. I can feel my pack members awakening across our territory." "Not just awakening," Elizabeth added, her Omega senses perceiving deeper currents through the unified bond. "Healing. The moonstone's energy is repairing the damage done by long-term implantation, restoring natural pack connections." Garrett's hand remained over Catherine's, their connection a steady anchor amid the tumultuous emotions flowing through the expanded pack network. "The Alliance's immediate threat is neutralized," he confirmed, "but there will be others, as the operative warned. This was one battle in what may be a very long war." "A war we'll face together," Elena said, her gaze meeting Garrett's with new understanding. "The old rivalries served their purpose, keeping our bloodlines distinct, our territories balanced. But against enemies like the Alliance, division becomes weakness. Unity becomes strength," Catherine completed the thought, the moonstone warming against her skin in apparent agreement. "Not just between Silvercrest and Ravenwood, but potentially all remaining packs." "A great conclave," Marcus suggested, approaching their group with Sarah supporting his tired frame. "Something not seen since before the European migration, a gathering of all bloodlines to share knowledge of the Alliance, prepare collective defenses." Elizabeth nodded, the strategist in her already considering implications. The moonstone could serve as more than weapon or shield. It could become a symbol of unity, of shared purpose transcending territorial concerns. As they discussed possibilities, Catherine felt the aftermath of combat and spiritual exertion catching up with her. The moonstone's glow had subsided to a gentle pulse, its energy conserving after the massive expenditure required to neutralize the Alliance network. Garrett sensed her fatigue through their strengthening bond, his hand moving from the obelisk to support her elbow. "You need rest," he said quietly, concern evident in his voice. "What you've accomplished today would exhaust even experienced Omegas, let alone someone 3 days awakened to their heritage." Catherine started to object automatically, the scientist in her reluctant to withdraw from such a fascinating convergence of events. But deeper wisdom, perhaps from her newly awakened Omega nature, acknowledged the necessity of recovery. "There will be time for planning," Elizabeth agreed, noting her daughter's exhaustion. "The immediate crisis is averted. Strategy can wait for clearer minds and restored strength." The conclave grounds gradually transformed from battlefield to healing center as both packs tended their wounded and assisted those recovering from Alliance control. Gaia arrived with medical supplies, directing a coordinated effort between packs to address physical injuries, while Omega members from both groups handled the psychological trauma of freed werewolves. Catherine found herself seated on the ancient stone dais, observing this spontaneous cooperation with scientific interest and personal satisfaction. Beside her, Garrett coordinated recovery efforts with Elena, their centuries-old rivalry transformed into cautious alliance through shared combat and purpose. "How are you feeling?" Elizabeth asked, joining Catherine on the stone surface, her own exhaustion evident but eyes clear with maternal concern. "Like I've lived several lifetimes in 3 days," Catherine admitted with a wry smile. "Everything I thought I knew about reality, about myself, has been completely reconfigured. And yet—" She paused, searching for words to express the paradoxical familiarity of her new existence. "It feels right somehow, as though I've been walking through life slightly out of phase until now." Elizabeth nodded, understanding in her eyes. "The wolf was always part of you, Catherine. The potential for both alpha strength and Omega connection. I did what I thought necessary to protect you, but perhaps I only delayed the inevitable alignment of your true nature." "I understand why you did it," Catherine said softly, no accusation in her voice. "You faced impossible choices with incomplete information and prioritized my survival above all else. That's what mothers do." Emotion welled in Elizabeth's eyes, a lifetime of fear and sacrifice acknowledged in her daughter's simple forgiveness. "I missed so much," she whispered. "Your graduation, your research breakthroughs, the woman you've become." "We have time now," Catherine assured her, taking her mother's hand, feeling the moonstone's warmth spreading between them in affirmation. "Different paths ahead perhaps than either of us imagined, but we'll walk them together." Elizabeth smiled through unshed tears, squeezing Catherine's hand. Her gaze moved to where Garrett stood, directing recovery efforts, an unspoken question in her expression. "That's evolving," Catherine acknowledged, following her mother's gaze. "The bond is real, undeniable, but we're both still discovering what it means beyond biological imperatives and mystical connections." "The true mate bond is rare for good reason," Elizabeth said carefully. "Its intensity can overwhelm individual identity if not approached with awareness and balance. But it can also create partnerships of extraordinary depth and meaning when both parties enter it consciously, eyes open to both its gifts and challenges." Catherine nodded, appreciating her mother's wisdom without defensiveness. 3 days ago, she might have dismissed such concepts as unscientific, mythological projections onto biological attraction. Now she recognized the limitations of her previous framework, how it had constrained her understanding of phenomena that existed beyond conventional scientific parameters. Across the clearing, Garrett looked up as if sensing their discussion, his gaze meeting Catherine's with warmth that transcended physical distance. Through their strengthening bond, she felt his respect for her autonomy, his willingness to let their connection develop naturally rather than rushing toward predetermined outcomes. As twilight approached, transforming the conclave grounds with long shadows and golden light, Catherine realized how profoundly her life had changed since driving into Cumberland Pass during that fateful snowstorm. The wildlife biologist who had sought her missing mother still existed within her, that scientific curiosity and methodical approach now complementing rather than conflicting with her awakened supernatural heritage. The moonstone pulsed gently against her skin, a reminder of responsibilities and possibilities stretching before her. Whatever came next, the Alliance's promised return, the challenges of pack unification, the evolution of her bond with Garrett, she would face it with the unique perspective of someone bridging multiple worlds, multiple identities. She was Catherine Morgan, scientist and daughter, but also heir to ancient bloodlines, keeper of the moonstone, embodiment of prophecy. Omega compassion and alpha strength united in one being, not in conflict, but in harmony, balance achieved not through suppression, but through integration. As the first stars appeared above the ancient stones, Catherine stood, ready to return to Silvercrest Lodge where planning would continue, strategies developed, new understandings formalized. But for this moment, she simply appreciated the culmination of a journey that had begun long before her birth, threads of destiny woven through generations coming together in patterns both predetermined and freely chosen. The wolf within her, so recently awakened, yet so fundamentally part of her being, raised its voice to join the chorus, now rising from both packs. The unified howl echoed through the mountains, announcing to the watching moon and listening forest that a new alliance had formed, a new chapter beginning in the ancient story of those who walked between worlds, guardians of natural balance against forces that would corrupt it for their own purposes. Catherine added her voice to this primal chorus, the scientist and the wolf, the human and the supernatural, united at last in perfect harmony.